a slice of pizza. We have an extra slice.
Oh,
It's caprese.
did you get that for one of yourselves?
Well, I got it for Sherry, but then I learned that
No.
she's gluten-free.
Well, but not 100% of the time, but I'm
Well, no,
gonna
sure,
try
you
to
have
eat
it then. I have.
No, I've got an avocado that I'm really excited about eating.
Oh.
Hence why the caprese pizza, which sounds really good on Pizza Nova, is yours.
Thank
What'll tempt you to break your gluten diet?
Oh, yeah, it's not strict. I don't have celiacs or anything. Just,
Good croissant or like a chocolate cake or something like
You
that?
like that?
it's more
Please,
likely
thank you so much.
really good like wheat grain
Fries.
bread, or sprouty kind of bread, or sourdough, or, pumpernickel or something.
Yeah.
Just don't do pasta or like processed flour very much.
Yeah.
So, and I don't even like to talk about it, cause, it's like, how can you tell a vegan, how do you know when you've met a vegan? They'll tell you in the first 5 minutes, it's like, trying to be gluten-free is like, really seems pesky. And trendy, and it's not the reason why I've done it for a while. Maybe a good,
I don't know, with all the things that are out there now, I think gluten-free is kind of passe. It's like, all kinds of strange allergies and.
yeah,
consideration.
exactly, way past that, yeah, I agree.
Ron, I have you here.
Okay, fine.
Well, oh, is there a plug nearby?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, if you can.
Yep.
Thank you. I thought of a good dance-off song.
What's that?
Well, the Herman Key Recreation Center application made me think about it. This is how one's brain works when it's been a long day.
What is the
Hopefully
password?
this stuff wasn't
What's that?
What's the password?
the number and root.
No idea.
For the internet?
Think
Yes.
Insane. and
You should just join City Guest, it's public, and then it'll prompt you
Cypress
to
Hill.
agree
It
to
was
something.
such a good, yes, it is.
Oh my gosh.
What were you thinking of, Flashdance or
No.
something a little more, it's a great
Jeff, were you
song.
did you think that we could go through some of those things at the
I
end?
absolutely do. I think,
Okay.
At least I
In fact,
thought I
I'm
would
very
make
much
it
hoping you guys
mentioning
should.
it, how about that?
Okay, great.
So you can research and throw me back your,
It's actually like 97 now?
Jeff, I've pulled up the
You
Martha
what?
Jeff shed, if you wanna talk about that first.
am I 97?
No,
What?
I'm saying, that's what when that song came out.
93.
93 was
Yeah,
it
I had
that
to
one?
look it up, I know.
Wow. Dang.
Really, really early hip hop,
Wow.
really early.
That's not that early. Hip hop, I mean, the early hip hop's like
Right,
79.
right.
You're going like
Beastie.
Grandmaster Flash
Right.
and the Furious Five. It's
And
like
then Beastie
78,
Boys is-
79.
So,
DJ Cool Herc.
here that is.
That's the first.
DJ Courtney, what?
He's the first one who actually started scratching records.
You guys gotta dive into the pre-meeting, or we're just gonna sit here and talk about what song we're gonna dance off to. And talk about early. But, okay, first, scratch record,
Pretty sure DJ Cool Herc, I think it's.
HER.
Am I right? There's a,
And maybe before we go into
What party?
the things at the end of the agenda, any brainstorming thoughts about, we need some new members.
so yeah, I sent you a note.
That's great to get some suggestions. I've got a couple from previous rounds that we have to follow up on, but we're very quickly gonna be a smaller.
We need an
It's
architect.
city
and,
guest.
Who else?
Yeah, City Guest.
We
I don't know why
we
it's
need
not
an
remembering it.
architecture, a historian, and a historian,
Historic preservation.
and a representative from the planning commission.
That's already in the works.
Yay!
And I guess whoever is.
Carl's back in town.
Yeah.
Carl's back.
Do we have
Hey.
a sense of who that will be on?
No, but I know there's 3 people that are very capable. I'm hoping one of them. Kareem Habib, who's with architect with DRW,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and Elizabeth, or Liz Russell, who's a historian, and, of course, Paul.
We had mentioned, talked about Liz in the past. Has anyone spoken to her about it specifically?
I have, but not to any conclusion. Talked to Kareem about it too, so they're sort of, floated it, but I didn't, nothing conclusive.
And currently, when are we slated to go back in front of city council with,
No idea.
so,
Things are, I don't know, yeah, there's quite a few things I have to, I told Robert, when he and I spoke last week, I said, I'm gonna think about all of this on August 17th. I have just had entirely too much on my plate and, mentally. Like I said, I tried to log into work last week and I couldn't remember my password. It's like, I need. That is on my list of things to follow up with council. I had let the clerk know that, the appointments are not, they're supposed to be made when there are vacancies, so it's not a,
right, okay.
they do whatever they want, but,
So we should encourage people to apply as soon as possible.
Thanks for mentioning it. Make us all think about who we know.
Is this Jody's last session?
not, well,
Yes.
that depends. And,
What?
well,
Well, if there's another courthouse meeting.
Oh, not the 31st, yeah. Does that look probable now that we came to about 17 decisions?
hard to say. Hey, Robert, I'm gonna send you, sorry, I've been putting the photographs of the, court samples in OPF just so I can put it up on the screen and have a conversation, however.
Okay.
But, oh, see if we get it.
Rebecca, I can get them in a bit.
Is there a
I'll
better-
do rounds.
Here's a trash can
Oh.
in here. Can I grab it?
All right, please go. Yeah, all right, it went, should be there.
Okay, I'm looking.
Robert's markup looks like I have random little red squiggles on mine too.
I think that was somebody else's.
Someone else out there. All right, so just to quickly cover this one while you, I had to go back through and really do a good read of the Historic Conservation District ordinance, and it's not, I think I said it in the notes, it's not well written, but the shed garage that's behind the property of 612 Locust is not, we don't review demolitions that are not
Visible from the
front
front.
yard, so there's a couple of criteria, so that one you can scratch that one as it's an interesting little exercise. It's one of the, I told the owner, it's one of those, it's hard to know what is original. I think it's been, you know,
Right.
bits and pieces changed over the years, but,
Do you think the roof was wood and then they put this thing, the metal thing over it? Looked like it had a lot of,
well, we know what it was because of the old Sanborns, but that's the stuff you buy at the hardware store.
right, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that's, yeah.
And so, and then I'll just say, so we don't have to talk about it later, but the same situation with 921 Rugby, the shed garage thing, and it was in the back, it's not on a corner or lot, so all we'll be talking about when we get to that is that driveway configuration. I think it should be relatively a simple conversation, but I just at least wanted to get your thoughts on it.
So
and
item 6 is off the agenda?
It's probably something that we can, I'm sorry,
Item 6 is off the agenda, sorry, 7, 612 Locust.
Yeah, I mean, and then, I said on 920 Rugby, hopefully, and I think the architect can be here, you can probably get it to where it's, we reviewed it, if you have thoughts about it, then it's something I can okay administratively as a minor alteration. And then the other one, Robert, one I just didn't know, I think Tom Comer's here, but this is Market Street Wine Shop building, the apartments. And there's some use, go to the image of they're along that wall on 3rd Street. I'm sorry, 4th Street, there's, I think they want to use the space in the cellar on the, which would be the north end, and they said, you know, could they, core drilling, and putting just round vents, get some ventilation into the cellar space. You know, the primary thing I said, well, nothing that sticks out, you know, so that's, you know, kind of like it's a dryer vent, whatever, so it would have to be flush. The guidelines don't really, and it's one of those sort of, it doesn't say you can't do this, it does talk about sort of, you know, things that allow light in the building. So I was going to tell them that I think, you know, color-wise, you know, I don't know, metal, white, whatever, round is good, and then just make sure they patch up that, it's not stucco, I think it's more of a parged wall, that makes sure that just doesn't look like it's all blown up.
What's that rectangle to the corner?
That's, you know, it's been there, I think, since I moved here. It's like somebody tried to paint it in the 90s and went, bad idea. But that's,
I just didn't know if that was like a book that closed in earlier.
No. And, so there's, so that's a question I just, like I said, I have in the,
I don't have a problem with that.
you know, think of anything, as long as, you know, it's sort of done neatly and done,
It's unfortunate.
I mean, yeah, too bad.
all right, thank you. Then
But I would not make it white, I would probably just either paint it or get a color to match.
All right, thank you. That's my gut feeling on it. Doesn't really, I'm always, I don't like making holes in things, but things that extend the life of you know, if they can give that space some use.
So it's to ventilate the basement?
And that would be the other
It's
thing.
always a little musty.
If
It
they're
is.
not used, if they
I mean,
be
it-
removed and patched.
Isn't
Yeah,
that where,
it is.
isn't that where the wine racks are?
Yeah, but not all the way back.
All the way to back.
Yeah. The shop probably goes halfway through the block.
Oh, okay. So
But
they
there's,
start,
but there's space back there.
Where Clinton hides the good beer.
so they would start halfway back and then work their way back?
I think it's only a few, a couple of
Yeah,
them
because
in the
it's
back, yeah.
flush to the,
All right, well, thank you on that one, and then, just if it since we do have a little bit of time, I can tell you, so the Key Rec Center, what my initial conversation with Scott Hendricks, I don't say mistakenly, but my understanding they wanted to change the roof, probably either to go with a faux slate or replace the slate or something to that extent. And, but he said that they really like to kind of discuss various options with you tonight. I'm not sure if they have something particular in mind. I've suggested that they, no matter what, they should retain the shingles. If they've only been up there about 85 years, it's probably another at least 50 to 80 years life in them. So it's something that can be used on another city building that has slate or sold or whatever. It's not something we want them just tearing off and throwing.
Who did the evaluation?
That was my question.
An architect, and they'll be here this evening.
Oh, okay, good.
But
And,
in 2018, same group.
I think so.
It was weird that there wasn't any attribution
It
for
was
a
a-
consultant. They usually,
Yeah.
are happy to put their,
So,
I just wondered.
and I think they've got, it's the typical, you've got the slate groups, it's got those spots, and it's like, we don't know which spot. I think the ridge slate were laid the wrong way, so that's one of the problems, but, and I had just said to Scott, I think that, faux slate, the city, the VAR has approved, you probably have life left in those slates. I mean, I was reading about the faux slate, and they advertise it as a 100-year product, but it's only been around, I don't know.
30 years,
Yeah, so
25 years.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe I'm speaking more as city taxpayer as anything, but the idea of a standing seam metal roof, no, or an asphalt shingle roof, I think that just crosses that line of a significant change. And
Is
I
it actively leaking?
I don't know.
Because it said that the survey was done with a drone. So,
Yeah.
did anybody ever actually get up there and really check?
Well, that's what I can't remember the architect's name, and then.
Jim
and then,
Boyd.
It's gonna let, Sherry and I talked
Jim
earlier.
Boyd?
Jim Boyd, Grim and Parker.
Is he gonna be here?
He'll be here.
And Sherry and I talked earlier today, that both picked up on something about, that Herman Key was, I only met him a couple times, Sherry knew him fairly well, and, but when this stems from a conversation I had with Brett a couple weeks ago about how when we're presenting projects, to be able to, give some context to those places, not just say it's the Brett Future building. And so I was a little surprised, there's very little on Herman and his story.
He played football in Flavanna, and
So-
then he got injured.
The opportunity to add a little of that. So that's where, I'm just really, so no decision needs to be made. I think I'm just gonna let, Scott sort of direct traffic and get from it what he wants. And then the other thing on the agenda, you all saw, I don't know, Channel 29 wanted comments about what's happening to the Brown Lock and Safe building. I have no idea. I've gotten a lot of questions about that, even yesterday from internal on staff. I have no idea what's planned. I can't speculate. This is simply a request to demolish the building. I don't think there's nothing about this building that, I think we probably had a better argument with, the history of the A&P building, but this one's really, there's nothing there to worry about, or to, sort of fight for, except well, there's some recommended conditions about that it just doesn't get knocked down and we have an empty lot, so.
What was the number of the building, or how would we identify the building that Jeff Dreyfus brought forward previously in that spot that would have been associated with this?
I can't, that's what I said, I can only speculate that there's a relationship, but they've said nothing to me about the plan
Yeah.
for the parcel.
Is it the same owner?
It
Wonder if
will
it's gonna
be.
be a laydown area or something for the construction.
And she knew the city's goals for.
Well, the previous building,
Right,
that
right,
entire
right.
space,
I'm sorry.
the previous building that they brought forward, and that the massing was approved,
tear down for no reason.
filled that entire space. It was from including the larger.
Pretty much.
And the
Yeah,
brown.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we've done it before.
I'm just guessing.
Paying for it since.
Hey, Tom, if Tom's still on, can you send him a note, just let him know that he's
Yeah.
good to go? I'll catch up with him.
Did we want to circle back to the discussion on,
Yeah, I remember that.
the court building? And see if we
can't remember.
could get anything closer on that, or,
I'm sorry.
or moving to a meeting on the 31st? Sorry,
11
I think
o'clock?
I might have missed something.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
It's fair, and I would, so what we're talking about is, if, and I, that's why we're gonna have the conversation, and Robert has photos we can put up on the screen. You know, there's still the whole project itself, and I don't know where all of you stand on that, but if there is support for the design, for where they are, then I'm comfortable with a COA, as submitted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, with a condition that the color palette, and then that very kind of, to the extent possible, expressed, is brought back as a separate COA and with some time constraint, so we're not like doing this forever. So the point being is that the brick size, the brick coursing, the design of the cornice, materials are all presumably acceptable. It's the color of the gray, the color of the brick, and the color of the mortar that will be brought back. And kind of the example I'm using in my head is code building, where when Fred came back, they changed the bricks. Now, we didn't go into the approval that way, but it's a similar situation. So we're just simply saying that everything about this is good, that you're going to resubmit a COA for the color palette, and we're just gonna, I think that's the way to do it. And but I just trying to think of a way that it's really establishing that this is a gentleman's agreement where we're committing to getting it done, and we offer some direction on it. This is not an opportunity to revisit the project. And I think that'll make everybody across the board. So, and the thing could be is, if we want to give some thought how to word it, or if you still may have questions, then we can decide this evening whether or not to go with that or emergency meeting.
I like that. And could,
I'm not trust
and
you.
remind me, could we make, would the coming back with the color palette be a condition? And if we said 6 months or something like that?
So what it would be is that, I'd say it would be
Let me know where you are,
Omitting
just so I can find you in
the
the
color
comments.
palette. And that will be submitted as a separate COA, and that releases the design, and, I think that's really, that's where they wanna start to get, is they start lining things up, but.
The day or here, by the way.
Oh, the day, hey days. And, so I don't, I think, the benefit is, yes, it's a city-county project, so we're all sort of on the same page, we're all in this together. That makes me feel a little more comfortable than, on some private projects where we have some color palette issues. I gotta tinker with it a little bit, hopefully I can have something I can circulate. But I'm very comfortable with that, and they seem very comfortable with that. So the only question remains, if tonight the group sees enough votes to approve the project design? And then if not, is there information that we can request from them for August 31st if we need it? You know, just so we know, cover all our bases. And the reason I've been very upfront about the August 31st date is Jody is going off the planning commission officially on the 31st. It would at least allow for some continuity of majority. You all have been involved in this project since the get-go. So
I think
if
you'd
not,
be getting rid of the one negative voice.
I realize that. But I don't know. I guess it's the idea of three unknown perspectives. I'd like to move this thing forward if it's ready, but.
Has that meeting been noticed yet, or
We will, if you all decide, we have the envelopes ready, we're ready to go. We'll probably be out there tonight putting the sign up, but we can't do it on that Tuesday because otherwise we would have to mail the letters today, so.
and what time are you thinking? Are we gonna determine?
I think same
Oh, it's on like
BAR time, same BAR channel, I think, I think we're good, we're good with it.
11 p.m., just before midnight.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the August 2022 Board of Architectural Review meeting. My name is Robert Watkins. I'm city staff. Just a reminder to all BAR members and to Jeff, make sure to bring your microphone up to you when you speak so that the world can hear us. We're now being streamed live, I think, on the city's streaming channels and on Channel 10. We have all of the BAR members here in person who are attending, but then we'll have some applicants joining us virtually as well, and we'll introduce people as they come on or leave. I don't have any other introductions except that if you're a member of the public and you're watching right now and you'd like to provide comment at any point in the meeting, you'll need to register for the meeting through Zoom on the city calendar, and you'll need to join the Zoom webinar in order to provide comment at the appropriate place. With that, I can pass things off to our chair, Brett Gastinger, but please let me know if there are any technical issues during the course of tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Robert. Welcome to this regular monthly meeting of the Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review. For each item, staff will introduce the project, followed by the applicant's presentation, which should not exceed 10 minutes. I'll then ask for questions from the public, followed by questions from the BAR. After the questions are closed, we'll ask for comments from the public, and then for each application, members of the public are allowed 3 minutes to ask questions and 3 minutes to offer comments. Speakers that are joining us should identify themselves and provide their address. Comments should be limited to the BAR's purview, that is, regarding the exterior aspects of the project. After the BAR's discussion and prior to taking action, the applicant will have up to 3 minutes to respond. So that brings us to the first item on the agenda is matters from the public not on the agenda, or for anyone would like to speak to items on the consent agenda, which today is just the meeting minutes from October 2021. Do we have any members of the public? If you would like to speak, you need to raise your hand in Zoom, or are we still doing phone? So
Yes, but I don't see any people joining by phone. Also, just for formality, we're joined by 2 members of the public here, but they're both applicants, and I assume they don't wish to provide comment. But for the 2 members who are on Zoom, if you'd like to provide comment, please raise your hand. I don't see any raised hands.
Okay. We'll move to the consent agenda, which this meeting includes the meeting minutes from October 19th, 2021.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, that brings us to our first deferred item, 350 Park Street, City of Charlottesville, County of Albemarle.
So, sorry, I can't do the last thing. So this is 350 Park Street is the primary address we're using, but it's also 0 Park Street and an address there on East High Street. This is for the City County Courts expansion project. This is at the Levy Building site. You all have been discussing this, I think, since October 2020. Preliminary discussion, and there was the approval of the necessary demolition of the annex on the Levy Building. And then last summer and earlier this year in February, continued discussion about the new design for the building expansion. And also we had a series of meetings with the architect. At one meeting, it was Mr. Alejandro and Ms. Lewis. Another meeting, Mr. Zemer was there, and in another meeting, Mr. Gastinger. And we met at the architect's office and reviewed some of the direction they were going. This was, I think, in the last 6 weeks. And so what that's represented, those changes, slight modifications are represented in the application has been submitted for this meeting. Also, earlier this evening, 4 o'clock, I think 6 of us, or 7, or 6 of the BAR members met at the Levy Building to evaluate some color samples and the brick samples. There was a pretty robust discussion about the color palette. I think in general, though, well, we'll have to discuss the direction we're going to take on that one. But it sounds like there are some, there's still a question to be resolved for the color of the brick mortar, and the gray that would be applied to the precast material and the metal. And I'll offer a suggested motion for that when we get to it. Otherwise, before us tonight is the modification of the design. Hopefully, it is where you all would like it to be. I think most of the changes, are what you all had talked about in the entrance. Around the foundation, there's some detail has been added at the water table. And at the height of the building, although I think we discussed that in February, the height of the building relative to the Levy Building, it's allowed the Levy Building to stand alone, and that was something that you all had been concerned about. And I think, we have not spent a lot of time on the courtyard elements, but it has come up in discussion. I'm saying that we haven't talked about it. It's just, I think the discussions seem to have been primarily about the building itself. So, and then just to clarify for folks at home what the goal tonight is, obviously, like to see approval, that at least staff's recommendation. Should there be additional information that the BAR would like to see, because Mr. Alejandro will be on the BAR for only through midnight, August 31st, or at least 11:59 and 59 seconds, would like to have the benefit of his input, having been involved in this process since the beginning. If the BAR wants some additional information and it's something we can get, we can vote, you all can vote on holding a special meeting that Wednesday evening, August 31st. And that would allow us tomorrow to get the letters and the notices out. So that option is available to you all. But again, it's primarily if there's information you want, we can get it. Otherwise, if this is not where you want it to be, then it would be, I guess, whenever, to a future BAR meeting for further discussion. So, do you have any questions for me? All right.
I think, and I know Eric
No?
and
So
company
Eric
are here.
and Steve?
All right, good evening. My name is Steve White. I'm with Fixture Architects in Washington, D.C.
Steve, could you just make sure you speak into the mic, just the people online?
Sure.
That will be the way they hear you.
Okay, great. I'll try to keep my mouth in the right position. And I have with me my colleague, Eric Antman from DGP, our local partner in this process. Tonight we are happy to present to you several revisions that we've made, a lot of progress in the last several months. I want to thank you, each of you, for your time and attention to this over those months to help guide some of the aesthetic direction. And I hope that tonight you'll agree that it's come a long way. Robert, I think we could probably fast forward to the slide that says East Site Building Design, because I think we're all pretty familiar with the context at this point. And you can go to the page after the narrative. So our site plan is essentially as it has been, and I'll rehash a couple of key points. The building form is driven by the organization of the courts. There are 2 courts in this building, and they're relatively large in size. They're about 60 feet by 40 feet clear, with supportive space around them for prisoner movement, for attorney-client counsel, for judges' access and sheriff's access. So it's a very technical layout in terms of how the building needs to be massed to function properly and safely. So that arrangement has continued. So we are a pretty filled out site, as you can see here, but that's really what's driving this. We are one single basement, and we have a primary floor of clerks, and then a second floor of courts. The Levy building, which is the building in the top left corner, is the historic structure, which many of you know about, and we were just there. That structure will have the Commonwealth Attorney housed in it. Our building is set back off of Park Street, creating a welcoming plaza and forecourt to the main entrance. If you go to the next slide, Robert, this is the ground floor. So you can see on the left the court there in that elliptical form, and the entry piece. All the things that are in that purple hue are public spaces, and everything in the white is the back of house office sort of functions for the clerks and the attorneys. And the next slide takes you to the court's functions, so you can understand again what's driving the shape of the building. In the next slide, we added a diagram for you to explain the way the building mass works. So the courts is the larger mass, it's the primary body, and then we have a series of saddlebag forms that are attached to that. The chambers to the north on High Street, the entry portico in the plaza, and then the hyphen. And all 3 of those forms are lower than the main form. And they create a variety of heights and proportions as you go around the building to help reduce the scale of the building in relation to the smaller scale buildings that are in the neighborhood. And this is a slide we've had with looking at the proportions of Levy as well as the original 1803 court, which is across the street, which this will be a part of, that court complex. In the plaza, most of the work there has remained consistent. There are a couple of changes that we'll be going over with you tonight that we want your feedback on, and I think we'll talk about those later mainly the benches. There are 4 benches that are between the 6 trees that flank the left and right as you're coming up to the building. And we're going to talk through those. We're also going to talk about the lighting. That was something that was asked for us to look more into last time we met. And those are just sections there. So this is a new rendering depicting the new building as it rests in that plaza. And some things to point out are that we've introduced the contemporary portico, the 3-bay portico that is reminiscent of the Greek Revival, but very much different from. You'll also see in the Levy building entry, there's a entablature portico element, sort of miniature element at the front door that's at the center bay. And in the same way, we have in our entrance, we have a lower weather vestibule at the entrance that is a single-story element as well. The depiction of all the architecture there is contemporary in nature, and we have details of those that we'll show you. The elevation helps to see the height relationships in terms of the relationship of the entablature at Levy. Our entablature hits at just above the architrave and and kind of in the Freese band. So the cornice lines are actually lower in the new building. Okay, so this is a section perspective of that entry piece. The columns are articulated in tube steel that is architecturally grade steel, so it's all the weld joints are clean, and it's pre-finished with a factory finish. There's a brise soleil element that helps to add some detail to the space, to the composition, but it also creates diffused light for those west-facing windows that are at the second floor of the lobby. One thing that is new here is that you can see we've added a linear light fixture. Do you see that on the left? It's on that single-story element, and it will throw light up onto the rooftop, underside of the rooftop, without bleeding to the night sky, creating a look sort of similar to the image there. And what that'll do is create a nice warm glow in the evening and create some ambient light for walking through the plaza, lighting the actual surfaces rather than through floodlight. And then coming around to High Street, this is of course the existing condition, and this is the proposed. With the addition, you can see that the hyphen is actually pushed back. The relationship and plan for the hyphen is equal to where the current building is, so that we're not exposing historic fabric that has been eroded with the current puncture through that east-facing wall. And then the saddlebag you see there in front of you on the left is the judge's chamber. And that's further divided into a 3-part bay and then a stair, the stairs expressed with a slight divot there on the right. And the elevation showing the relationship to Levy. On the Jessup House side, the Jessup House, does obstruct most of that view, but you have the court function essentially behind it, and the clerk's windows along that wall as well. And then coming around to the south, again, these are articulated in modulated bays. We did accentuate the pilasters by making them 4 inches deep rather than the 2 that we had previously, and creating a little bit more shadow line. Here we have a 5-bay module, and then we have the stair again, articulated with a slight divot or depression. And then if you go to the next slide, it's a section perspective, which shows the shadow lines that you get from the articulation of the pilasters. It's all very simple detailing, but there's corbelling in there, some banding that really breaks up the space. We added at the belt course at the bottom, we added rustication, which is a 1-inch reveal every 5 or so courses as you go from the belt course down to grade, and that extends around the building. And then you can see in the piano nobile on the second floor that there's a clear story or a transom window, and that window lets light. If you keep looking through the section there, you can see the clear story in the courtroom, and that bounces light up into the courtroom, which is a very common tool used in modern courthouse design. And these depictions are not nearly as good as standing out in the rain with me at the Levy House. So I don't think we have too much to say there, but I do appreciate the comments that we received. And we would like to offer up making some new panels based on the comments that we got about the mortar color and about some of the trim color comments that we had, and we would like to continue to refine that. One thing I will point out is that the bottom left is a black and white picture, but that is the Norman brick proportion, and it's at 1/3 coursing, so that's the coursing that we're offering as what we believe is a very subtle shift in the normal Flemish bond that's in the plaza in the historic structures to differentiate it from its neighbors. And this is just simply a study of how windows intersect with belt coursing, and it was based on a discussion we had at one of our individual meetings earlier this summer. So I would like to spend a little bit of time on this slide. This is the top left is a stone top bench that we think is the right bench for this. We're proposing a linear in-grade light fixture that would go between the metal blade stanchions that would support the concrete top bench, or stone top bench rather. And it would create enough ambient light sort of thrown out into the plaza so that would essentially be our egress lighting, if you will, to get to the public way. So avoiding basically street lamps for that space. We also have lit bollards, which are on the upper right, and those occur as a safety measure as well as for lighting. We have confirmed that the honey locust is acceptable to the county and the city's list of acceptable tree species, and believe it's a good selection because its foliage is thinner and easier to see through, and it's not as heavy, which will help you to see the building, since the building is a good 60 feet back from the street. And then the final slide is simply treatment of brick walls and some bluestone treatments of other site walls. Our entry feature wall that's part of that curved ellipse is in the bluestone color and has the signage for the city and the county. I hope it didn't go too long.
No, I think that's great. We will open it up to any questions that we might have from the public.
We're joined by some folks here in person and as well as some folks online through Zoom. We'll start in person. If anybody wishes to provide or has any questions from the public, you can come forward to the podium. If not, to our 3 people who are joined online on Zoom, raise your hand, please, if you'd like to ask questions. I don't see any raised hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay, questions from the board?
I have a few. Thanks for the walk around today. I appreciate seeing the brick in person. That's a big help. Just going through your presentation, I'll go from the back up, or some of the final points. The benches that you're proposing, I'm sorry if I missed it, but did you clarify what the legs are going to be underneath? Is it a metal
Yes.
fin, or is it a?
It's and this is a catalog bench, so we're not creating a custom bench. But it is, I believe, and I don't know if our friends at Roadside Harwell are actually on the line or not, but I believe it's a stainless steel blade, essentially, plate.
So these are basically the benches that we'd expect, the ones that you're showing here.
Yes.
Can you all hear me?
Hey,
This is
Drew.
Hello. Yeah, yes, it is a metal bench. I'm sorry, metal fin. I have the website open. I'm trying to confirm which type of metal. I don't know that it's stainless steel. I think it's either stainless steel or aluminum.
Okay.
And your thought was the one on the left-hand side, that where the light's not being seen, or is it the one on the right where the light is, you can see the actual fixture?
You would see the, do you see where the one that says in-grade uplighting under bench?
Yeah.
So we don't have a picture of that light with that bench, but it would be a light, a linear light that would be between the blades
Okay.
in a length that's some distance less than the blade, separation.
Okay.
And then there would be another one next to that. So it's like 2 4-foot. Is that about right, Drew? About,
Yes, I think the lights are 3 feet long and the
Okay.
fins are 4 feet long, and they are stainless steel. Sorry about that.
okay.
But I guess my question is the light something you would see, like on the right-hand side, or is it more like on the left-hand side where you wouldn't actually see the fixture, but the illumination of the bench?
Yeah, we went through a pretty exhaustive exercise about finding a light. We initially wanted to find a light that was under the bench, and to find one that wasn't, through the roof astronomically expensive. The concerns that we did have of the ones we did find was that they would get either vandalized or tampered with, and they would easily fall. The connection, we weren't satisfied with the connections to the bench. It wasn't really integrated, I would say. So we actually went in a full circle. We started with in-grade, and we had concerns about the in-grade, but we never found one in the bench under the seat that was, we have to remember this is outdoors and it's in a public space. So, someone fiddling with it is to be expected. So
Right.
that's how we ended up back with the in-grade. I will say that the cutoff, we'll design the cutoff for the light so that you're not blinded by uplight, both for night sky, but also just because it's glare.
Yep. And then I just have two other questions. The light temperature of the light up on the canopy roof, do you have a sort of a temperature range that you were thinking about?
Well, I want to get warm.
Yeah.
In the 2000s, 2800, something like that, because the 4000, 5000 look blue and they're very cold and not very appealing.
Okay. And then I just noticed on your notes that the steel posts, you called them out as galvanized, but also painted. I think a galvanized has been kind of a rougher, finish, and then a paint on top of that. Would that be a sort of a rougher look, or are you looking for something more
Well,
sort of fine?
We're trying to get the best, most long-lasting yet cost-effective solution for the county. So we've used this before. I do agree that it's not as absolutely crisp as, say, a stainless steel, but it is a very acceptable. I wouldn't call it rough. It's dipped in the galvanized system, and then it's high-performance coating that's painted on top of that. And so it takes a really long time for rust to actually occur.
Yep. Thank you.
Sure.
All for me.
Thank you for your questions.
Sherry?
What are the dimensions of the bollards?
Oh, how high are they?
And, yeah, just how,
I would guess that they're around the 36 to 42 inch range. You know, something like this. You agree?
I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
the site perspective looks like they're about 36, so I just wonder. And the bluestone wall, in the site perspective, it looks like that wall, although it's kind of shaded, you can't tell, but it looks like it's almost like parged concrete or, I don't know, something else. But would that, I thought that was intended to be a seating area. Is that still the thought, that that would be a surface upon which
Yes.
people could sit?
Right, on the, particularly on the ellipse side,
Mhm.
you'll be up a little higher, and you could sit on that,
Yeah.
for sure, yes.
So is there an actual bench that's lower than sort of the curved, for lack of a better word, sign, or is that all one system?
Yeah, it's, Drew, I don't know if you, I know you don't have a separate, say, bench that's integrated into it. I just think that it happens to be a height that would be acceptable to sit on. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct. There would be a low seat wall, no specific bench top or attached bench to it. And then on the downhill side, it would be less than 30 inches so that we wouldn't need a railing.
That's all I have, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lewis.
The feet on the stone benches, do they go below the paving and then sit on a concrete footing or pad below the paving so that they disappear through the paving instead of sitting on
Yes.
top of the paving?
Yes, sir. So the, all the brick pavers, well, there'll be a concrete base that'll be poured,
Right.
and then it'll be anchored to that.
Okay.
And then the bricks will be laid around and cut to fit.
Thank
Is that your understanding, Drew? I didn't mean to speak for you.
That is correct. That's how we will detail it.
Good.
And we will work with the manufacturer, make sure that happens.
Thank you.
I had a follow-up question on the regarding that lighting. Some manufacturers offer a glare reduction lens or a low glare lens, and I'm not sure if that's available with this manufacturer, but I would certainly recommend it if it is possible, rather than a clear lens. But the cutoff is also a good detail to keep an eye on.
Thank you for that.
I had a question about the planting area on East High Street that's labeled as planting bioretention area. And I wondered, given both some of the concerns about the facade on East High Street, and if there is potential for a taller, more vertical street tree in that planting, or how that bioretention area is functioning.
Robert, do you have the ability to pull that up?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up now.
Drew, do you want to speak to, or do you know, because that's really a Timmons calculation, right, on the,
Yeah, I don't have the civil drawings in front of me. As far as it needing to be bioretention, that is correct. And also the area in the sort of the nook just to the south of that, which is labeled as planting area, also needs to be a bioretention area. I don't believe we have a cross section, but they are bound by short curb walls to contain the runoff. And then they are essentially typical bioretention facilities with a mix of bioretention soil and then planting that will reach 70+% coverage within less than 2 years. I don't believe that we have enough room to fit a tree in either of those areas.
Okay. Thank you. Then one small detail question about the facade as it relates to colors in some of the conversation we had previously. I don't have a page number for your presentation separate from our packet, but it's the section perspective of the east site, typical bay. On our packet, it's page 81. In that image, it looks like there are a couple of different tones of gray that are happening with the window trim. Is that the intention, or are we picking up some fragments from the model lighting, or what's your?
Yeah, that's a fair question. This is a in-house rendering from a Revit model, and the Revit model, we assign a material. So the top is the GFRC, the panel, the lintel panel on the first floor window is aluminum. The cast stone is cast stone, and each of those reflects light differently.
Okay.
And the accuracy of the Revit model.
Gotcha.
So and I guess in reality too, they
Sure.
will reflect light differently. But the intent is they're the same color.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Then there's one other follow-up with that same drawing, and it shows up in this lower window. The mullion pattern is reversed, or there's a lower mullion and then a bigger bay, which is reflected in the south elevation, but on the east and north elevations that's reversed, and I didn't know if that was intentional or
between the first and the second floor, it is intentional. If the east-west, maybe Robert, if you can flip
If you
through, I don't
scroll
remember.
back
There
a
could
couple
be a mistake in there. Yeah, that's a mistake. So that evolved, and that's an error. So the intent is what you see in this drawing,
Gotcha.
and we
Okay.
can make that adjustment.
That's fine. I just wanted to know what the intention was. And then lastly, related to some of the brick discussion, we didn't speak specifically to the color of the brick in the horizontal plane, but I'd love to hear more about what you guys are thinking as it would relate to the building color. And then several of the drawings, such as the plaza enlargement site plan, it looks like there's either a pattern change or a color change in the ellipse versus the rest of the brick. And I just wanted to understand a little bit more the intention with the horizontal brick color.
And Robert, yeah, I think it's at the beginning of the deck. There's that site plan, that one, right? And Drew, you didn't have the benefit of walking the site with the board, but we had sample panels of the vertical building brick, but we did not have panels for the horizontal material. Do you want to speak to some thoughts on the color in terms of its relationship to Park Street brick?
Right, yeah, the intention is to try to match the Park Street brick as close as possible, but also to understand that once that building brick was selected and finalized, that we would have to confirm that that's complementary, the Park Street brick, that is. So that brick hasn't been fully selected, but that is the design intention to match the Park Street brick. As far as color change within the ellipse there, there is a pattern change, and I believe that's what is coming through.
Can you zoom in like very close on the ellipse? Does it? Yeah, is that a herringbone?
That's correct.
I don't
So it was
remember.
running bond within the rest of the larger field, and then within the ellipse, it was a herringbone. Yeah.
The line drawings in the drawing set are better depictions than this color drawing. Oh, does it? Okay. Did you hear that, Robert? If you go to that one, is it in that? Yeah, that just had the outline though.
That's okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
I mean, the Park Street brick has gray bricks in it, in the field. Is that the intent?
To have a variegated, stippled sort of.
And then
pattern.
also still have the elliptical design with the spokes of the wheels, so to speak? Right.
Yeah, I think we should drill down on that. Perhaps when you're in the ellipse, maybe that speckle does not occur as sort of almost like a rug that's on top of the Park Street pattern. That's something we can look at.
Yeah, we could study that.
Other questions from the board? Yeah,
I have
James?
One more question. The note that on the overall site plan had repointing and repairs to the front steps of the Levy building. Are there any other exterior repairs to Levy in the scope of work?
Yes. There's, do you want me to speak for you? I can speak. Well, there's roof replacement. There is brick repointing and repair. And there's pilaster, plaster, and cornice plaster repair
Okay.
and rehabilitation.
Is that something we need to see in a subsequent submittal, or is it sort of replace in kind?
It's in the current construction documents that we have, so it's all documented, it's just not shown
Sure.
in this proposal.
Right.
Okay.
Just one other follow-up then with that. I've found that brick repointing can be a pretty fussy thing, getting the right match, making sure you have the, especially for this kind of a building that's precious, finding the craftsman that will do it to the point, to the quality level that we want.
Sure, I'm Eric Antman, architect in Charlottesville. That's a great question, David. The restorations, well, first of all, we have a general contractor on board who's a construction manager who will be having all the subs pricing the work later on. However, Worcester Eisenbrandt is the restoration subcontractor that's already been brought on as sort of a secondary general contractor, if you will. And I actually worked with them on the historic Madison County Courthouse. So I can attest to the fact that the masons that'll be doing the work are qualified. It's a qualified restoration company. But you're absolutely right with the color selection of mortar. We actually have a blend of, that's a kind word, an admixture of various generations of lime mortar and Portland cement mortar. And the strategy is not to cut everything out and try to repoint the entire building. Only where the mortar has failed or is starting to cause damage to brick will it be removed and replaced. So unfortunately, where we have areas of Portland cement mortar from previous repointings that are not damaging the brick, that's going to be left in place. So there will never be a uniform appearance to the building, although we will try to match as best as we can.
Any other questions from the board? All right, let's see if there's any comments from the public.
To members of the public who are here in person, if you'd like to provide comment, now is an appropriate time. If not, then we have 2 members of the public attending online. If you'd like to provide comment, please raise your hand. I don't see any raised hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay, comments from the board. And maybe while we're gathering our thoughts for comments from the board, I just note that there were a number of meetings that have happened since the last public presentation. So keep that in mind if there was direction that you felt like was given or received, and then related to the brick color and brick mortar and metal color. I'd like us to try to see what we can agree upon in terms of an approach to give them good direction moving forward. We may not be able to agree upon a single set of those colors, but we might be able to agree upon a direction or directions that they should return to us with.
Excuse me. Breck and Sherry, I just sent to you kind of a draft of try to get my thoughts as clear as possible on at least sort of a starting point for that. Figured it'd be simple to send it to the 2 chairs first, and then we can.
Okay, I'll take a look, but let's go. Any comments? Anybody want to start off?
When we met earlier today, I think we were focused on the facade color and the trim and basically of the new courts building and in its environment. And the kind of surprise for me was the question about what this plaza is going to look like and what those bricks are going to look like, and whether we would want them to look like the street, which has this sort of variegated, a good word or whatever, checkered, I would call it, pattern of contrasting colors, and whether that would work with the very articulated oval shape with the trim and bluestone or whatever it is. So I think I'm hesitating, I was ready to sort of maybe support either camp depending on how people were feeling about the brick color hues programming, but now I'm further confused because I'm realizing there's going to be an expanse, a huge expanse of brick right in front of this brick building, and I would want them to not be fighting each other, or at least be complementary, or whatever the pattern is or whatever. And I'm not sure that we have quite enough in front of us just on the plaza itself. It looks like it's just looks like it's just bond. Is that correct? But we're not sure what the colors are at this point. Is that it? I mean,
Well,
question there.
yeah, because of the complex form, there are actually a couple of different patterns that are in there. Remind me, Drew, what the pattern was. We said herringbone in the ellipse.
Correct.
It's running.
And it's running bond.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's just American running, yeah.
Running bond for the grander field.
And then it looked like perhaps the sidewalk was a herringbone, which I think it might currently be, or it might have been redone. Okay, but you
It's
showed
running.
that in a herringbone. Okay, thank you. Great. Good. So,
Sure.
yeah.
To overall kind of respond to the strategy
Mhm.
for what's historic and what's not historic.
Mhm.
The whole sort of flat work of paving in Court Square is non-historic and modern. So the team with Drew's help with, and Roadside Harwell, the landscape architect, early looked at, should we do a new design for the plaza that's unique and different, sort of as the facade of the building is, or should we make the plaza tie into the rest of Court Square? And the decision was made, in that case, being a non-historic condition, it was better to match it, to have continuity throughout the paving surfaces, to sort of tie it all together, which then allows a little more latitude for the building to do something different than an historic condition.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Eric.
I guess I'll just comment that I feel like the building and the architects responded pretty well to our comments from the last time this was presented to the BAR, especially in terms of breaking up the massing and both vertically and horizontally, giving some stratification. I think we all thought it looked like a big block, and y'all have done a nice job to kind of help cut that up and add some shadow lines, and I appreciate that, so thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. I think that the further articulation of some of the detail, giving a little bit more relief to some of the facade, I think not only makes for a more interest in the building, but also I think brings out some of the careful proportion studies that were happening in those elevations. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. I unfortunately didn't get to meet. I was out last month, so I'm seeing this after an iteration, and so I'm still back in early spring. So this, for me, you know, I think the real plus is what my colleagues have mentioned, the further articulation, the more of a variety of materiality. I'd also say that I think you did a good job in paying deference to the Levy building, you know, in both of those perspectives. You really kind of, you get a building that, as the word we've been using out there, complements it, complements the surroundings very well. So, you know, both with the cornice line and the sort of the you know, the rhythm of the windows and the bays. I feel like there's a you know, there's a general consistency that kind of flows between the two, but you know, separates the new from the old. So I think that's a good thing.
Thank you.
I'll just say, in general, we've come a long way on this building and really appreciate the applicants, and obviously the county as the project manager, allowing the project architects to make those changes. We had seen some facades specifically on the east and west side, losing my side, north and south, that had, there were big expanses of wall without any apertures, and you've added those, thank you very much, so I don't have to look at a plain brick wall with no windows, you know, across the street from my office. They're just, the front entrance has undergone a lot of different iterations, but it's really, really quite attractive, and it'll be a very significant public building. It really is. I mean, from the first view that we saw, the first rendering, this is really very attractive. You know, I'm ready, like I think a lot of us are, the majority of us are, to support approving this. I think we're kind of stuck on the brick and trim tones after this afternoon, not for lack of options that have been given us, I just think we are not at a consensus point right now, if I can summarize the state of things. So, and I'm looking at this motion that was suggested. And I don't think I feel comfortable saying all these words, so, nor do I think that I agree with all of them, so, I appreciate staff putting it in front of us, but I think that's why I'm staring blankly.
Well, I was gonna say.
But thank
yeah.
you, Mr. Warner.
I've just
Taking a
as
step.
clear as my head's been for about 2 weeks, so I'm glad that it actually came out the way I was hoping it did. Maybe a suggestion is just ignore this motion for a moment, and the last 2 sentences are really where sort of what is it that we want to express. And so again, forget about how you word it right now and sort of those blanks, and I'll read it so that everyone can know how unusual it is. But essentially, it's the same motion for approval with the addition of including, application is submitted, including this brick size and the coursing. I thought it was important that we clarify that. We can certainly refer to something specific if need be. However, with the understanding that the color palette is omitted, specifically the brick color, the mortar color, and the gray for the precast stone and metal elements, and will be submitted for approval as a separate COA. Additionally, the intent is that the approved color palette will result in the brick and mortar appearing less, I said pink salmon, than the samples presented at the site tonight, and more or less blank, if some suggested language, and that the gray will be similar to, and I simply numbered them or lettered them A, B, or C as presented, and more or less fill in the blanks of what you'd like that gray to be. So, and then the last piece I had is finally the BAR and the applicant have discussed the need for an expedient decision and are committed to finalizing the color palette no later than pick a BAR meeting date. So, as I said, my suggestion would be to kind of pick up on the, where I said the intent is that the approved color palette will result in the brick and mortar appearing what? And that the gray will be similar to, not similar to, one of the 3 samples. And Robert, do you have, yeah. And so. And Sherry,
Well, I
Brett,
mean, I
if
guess
you
I
want, can
mean,
fire it out.
I am interested in the language. I think I wonder though if we do follow the logic of this, of separating out the color palette as a separate COA, do we need to have in the motion the direction that we're giving them, or can that be a commentary?
My suggestion is, again, given that this is city-county project, we're all in this together, so to speak.
Right.
It's a little bit different than, I think, a private applicant. But I think I agree with you, and we could certainly just simply, do the okay, omit the color palette, and even in the motion refer to tonight's discussion. But in some way that we are all able to look at each other and say, yes, we agreed to do this, and this is what we expressed.
Right.
And now, I mean, you may, again, some of you may say, no, I want to see more brick colors. I don't know what I want it to be. I understand that. I'm just trying to nudge in a direction, but I'm not saying you have to go there. But I
Right.
think that you could make a motion that omits the color palette, be specific about what that color palette is, at least frame the intent of resolving it soon. And I think you'd be fine.
So I think at the heart of it, from my perspective, is that in the documentation, there were some attractive examples of precedent buildings that had one color approach there were some renderings of the structure that had an attractive color approach, and then the samples were not, they were somewhere in between, and it was unclear which way the building would be going or what we'd be really receiving. We are, I mean, I think that our purview as the BAR, we do need to keep that in mind. I think that the project is within our guidelines in the way that it's in the way it's been presented and way the changes have been made. However, we know how critical some of those last color decisions can be especially in the kind of context that we're working in. There's a lot of different context. It's really hard to choose exactly how this knits in. But I do think it's worth continuing that dialogue with the BAR and being a part of that. So long as we are able to give them clear direction and allowing them to move forward if the board is in favor of approval.
I have a hard time being specific in the writing, a little less this, a little more that. I just say from my own personal view that I didn't see the brick samples being complementary to what's there. That's a personal preference. I guess and to your point of how we move this forward, I, for one, would be more than willing to come back and look at other samples that you bring, have a broader discussion. I think at the end of the day, that's probably what this is about, is to get a number of different people looking at it and generating a few more viewpoints as we find our way to some kind of consensus, because this is a really important part of the project. It's 99% of the surface area, including the ground surface, and there's an awful lot of brick in those two blocks to begin with. So just want to make sure we get it right.
Mr. Chair, I had a question for the applicants, because we were looking as part of our motion, the suggested motion, to require or strongly suggest that you come back and that we vote on the final brick color scheme, brick trim color scheme. It's been suggested that maybe we should hopefully have that done by October or November. Does that sound realistic for your engagement and your time? Would you, like David has said, be available for other informal meetings, or maybe we, I don't know, meet again on the 31st, just sort of because it's on our calendars?
Well, I don't know if this is out of bounds or not, but what's in my mind is if we could, tonight get to a sort of conditional approval that the design intent is there. If we can get a mason hired on board, we can have, I personally think we can have panels that are bigger and that are actually built on the ground, that are right next to the building, that are much more substantive, and we can test the, and we would do this, and if there was no BAR oversight, we would be doing that anyway, and we would be testing these mortars with bigger. It's really tough to be looking at a small, they're back, small little 1x2 panel with wood trim around it. And the same goes for we'll have real samples of cast stone with the color, and real samples of the GFRC with color. I think I know I will feel more comfortable myself with choosing what I think's going to be the most appropriate direction.
I guess our question is, what would the time frame be?
Well, we're slated to go to bid early next year, and the construction period is 2 years. So it would be, in the submittal phase, the beginning mobilization phase, probably after the demolition of the annex, the 80s annex.
I'll just say to the board, I'll just say to the board, I'd be comfortable suggesting that a decision should be made by the end of the year.
Sure.
just to throw something out.
Would that be in your timeframe, by the decision's made with regard to the brick, the trim, and all that, before you do?
Well, that's another take on it. It's just that I think we'll be making a decision based on what I can get from suppliers who don't have the project yet. And it's going to be small pieces. That's my concern, is that we won't have really as much information. But if that's the desire of the board, I would work with you
And I'll
on
also
that.
kind of address the elephant in the room, because I can see Mr. Warner making some faces. We aren't, we're told not to approve anything conditionally.
Right.
So the suggestion has been made that we could approve a certificate of appropriateness, exempt out the color scheme, and then require that you come back and get a separate certificate of appropriateness
Right.
for that before you move forward. And I think that's kind of what city attorney would like us to do, rather than a conditional approval.
So I think a piece of this, and you know, you're right. And I've worked on projects where we've done the sample panel and the architect's like, oh my God, what was I thinking? So the reality is that they'll be making some adjustments, decisions as well. So it is, that's why I'm kind of, having been through this in other iterations, I'm comfortable with the knowing that we're going to look at something, but I would very much prefer that some direction be given. And like I said, what I heard tonight was, there was some question about contrasting with the Levy building. There were comments about it being, the color being a little too pink, a little too salmon color. So it would be, the more we can narrow this down and provide direction, and not just say, gosh, I'll know it when I see it. I don't want to go that, I do not recommend going that far. But I would also say we could, if you guys, things are so dynamic right now in construction. I don't know, if you might find out a month from now, we better pick something. So I think again, a gentleman's agreement to some flexibility might be necessary here. And if circumstances change on their end, that we commit to responding to it.
If I could just respond to Ms. Lewis, what you just said, two separate C of A's, certificates of appropriateness, is exactly what project development needs. Because the second C of A is not a cost issue. We're picking colors and joint patterns. And that's exactly the approval that the county and the city need, so that project development can move to construction documents and we can stay on schedule. And coming back for a material palette approval later is fine, whether that happens this fall because it's better for you, or next summer because it's better for the contractor, is not the main point. Moving the design forward is.
I think that solves the problem.
I would like to at least say, because I won't be here, and whatever bit of guidance I can offer the group, to my mind, a brick color that is less orange, that is not orange, but within the range of the red that is surrounding this project, even if it's a lighter red, that's fine, but light to dark red, but not the pink, not the orange, and a lighter mortar color, buff color or something. Those would be my personal recommendations. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I just wanted to offer that in case it would be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could we pull up one of the renderings and comment on have you specifically, Mr. Alejandro, comment on the sort of salmon and lighter, like that color palette, or the perspective cutaways actually show it better? I think this is the salmon orange scheme, because that's what my eye sees there. That's more to orange and salmon. You're saying move away from that and more towards the
Towards
red.
red.
Thank you.
Again, my opinion.
That's what I wanted to make sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, I support that. I also support more of a tan or buff mortar joint as opposed to the pink that we saw in the samples. I think that kind of gets to y'all's goal of being homogeneous a little bit with the other court buildings, but in using the Norman brick is a much bigger scale to our traditional Virginia brick, that's gonna help set it apart. So, I think Eric's kind of got to the point that we can approve materiality here in brick and cast stone and steel and aluminum. It's just the color palette that we want to see come before us again. So,
Could I try a resolution? What, I mean, I don't know how complicated it has to be, given this discussion, but suggested motion approval, having considered the standards set forth in the city code, including the city design guidelines for public design improvements, I move the proposed course expansion project Levy Building satisfies the BAR's criteria, is compatible with the North Downtown AUC district, and the BAR approves the application as submitted with the following conditions: that a further COA be submitted in which the board considers the brick and other trim color palette of the building before it goes forward.
Would you accept a friendly amendment that we approve what's been submitted as far as materiality, brick size, and coursing?
Yes.
I'll second your motion.
Any discussion?
Can you read that just one more time for my brain?
Well, it's exactly as you wrote it, except for the fact that they must submit a subsequent COA, certificate of approval in which the board has to approve the color palette, the trim, the brick, and other things, plus a friendly amendment.
About materiality, brick size, and coursing are being approved.
Right, because the board.
They will not
the
be
board
revisited.
may be, I don't know how much changeover there is, but the board could be quite different a year from now. If it is a year
This
from now.
COA goes through
For the design.
for the design.
Right.
So all the other board people will say, well, maybe we want orange bricks after all.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Nothing wrong with blue.
But to Ms. Lewis's point, the coursing and the material would be approved.
Yes.
Right, which is, right.
And Mr. Warner suggested that we specifically include that in the motion, so those can't be revisited.
Right.
And
My
if,
only reason I'm just hesitating, my brain is to make sure, one of the goals was to be very specific about the color palette, what it is. It is the brick color, the brick mortar, or the mortar color, and the gray.
And the bluestone and the, what, yes.
Yeah. So it's just sort of like.
I use the word trim. I don't know if
Trim.
that's architecturally appropriate,
It is.
so.
Robert, you think
Now-
we have that from, we can get that from the. I have it.
and if I heard correctly, I did not hear a time frame on on the color palette. Is that necessary? Or,
They're the ones who have the urgency,
right,
right?
right.
So,
Right.
whenever y'all want to come back.
And I'm fine with that. I just, since, given the previous discussion, I wanted to make sure everybody else was. Okay.
I guess to clarify, Mr. Bailey said before the project goes forward, so
Oh.
we want to make sure they have what they need to go forward at
To
this
go- right.
time.
All right, well,
Move to call the question.
all right. I will call a roll call vote. Mr. Timmerman,
Aye?
Mr. Zemer,
Aye.
Ms. Lewis,
Aye.
Ms. Mr. Lahindro,
Aye.
oh, and Mr. Bailey.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Passes.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your hard work.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. That was,
Go
I
celebrate.
feel like we should stand up and do a little hooky. Dance off.
We're not dancing anything with the word hokey in it.
No, I mean,
Sorry.
it actually, I mean, it does feel like this is probably the first start to finish project that I've been involved in, and as the staff, and it was, I've also been involved in the whole, as most of you know, the courts discussion for almost 2 decades in my other position, and so getting the city and county to come together and work on this is a culmination of a lot of things. But I particularly like that, I don't know, I think it was 3-4 years ago when now I cannot remember his name, the gentleman from the county came in, we talked about ideas for this, and so it was sort of, it still seemed like, years off. So it is neat to bring something to fruition, so, and I thank you all, and,
It's not built yet.
we're not done yet, I know, hey, believe me, I know, we got ways to go.
Yeah.
All right.
I think, next thing up is the fountains, but I just wanted to say to all, I apologize, I've had a rather difficult, past 4 weeks. It's sort of like that country western, joke, if you play the song backwards, friend comes home, his truck doesn't wreck, and his dog doesn't die. My wife came home from a trip, brought COVID. It knocked me on my back, and I've been in a fog ever since. And our dog did die, and it was heartbreaking. That's all right. He was 16. He was ready to go. But it was, and it's just been and as some of you know, Robert will be leaving us to wrap up grad school, and his goal is to be in Chicago next year. I'll say some things at the end, more specifically to that. But it's been he came over to my house last week, and he's like, I really haven't known. Because I know you've been having a rough time. So, so I just apologize again. I said the COVID brain has been really an odd sensation, and I hope I'm coherent. And if I'm not, Robert, just take over and turn my microphone off. So the next one, more fun with local government. This is a request from the city of Charlottesville to install metal grates at the 3 small fountains located on the downtown mall. And this is one of those interesting stories where I didn't know that there were 3 fountains. I knew there was the big one. I think I knew of the one at the Nook, and I didn't know where the other 2 even were because the way the mall has sort of evolved. But these are the 3 small fountains that are, they're stone on top of a stone pedestal. I don't know if they've been on for some time. And what the situation we have is that because of issues related to pedestrian safety, ADA accessibility concerns, a decision was made to install grates at these 3 fountains. So this does not include the large fountain at Central Place. I think there's discussions will come up later about that. The request came in to install metal grating and to be installed on a metal bracket that would be bolted to the inside of the fountain pool. My suggestion was that we consider something that is where the grate is set in, and it would be 2 pieces. The grate is set in and can be lifted and removed. That it's not permanently anchored into the stone. There's no boring, drilling, things like that. That's a possibility. Just to explain that drawing that you see there, actually just kind of roughly sketched off of the Halpern drawing. So that's there's actually that lower set of bricks at the bottom. I think there's something actually on the top of the blocks. But either way, that's what the sort of the general construction of these are. So Robert, scroll down a little bit, and so you can see there just my suggestion to Parks and Rec. Obviously, we have to determine that it could be done, but the idea being that a flange is on the edge of the metal, and then it sets down in. We're not, again, making holes in the mall. I had also said to all of you, if you had another idea, I tried to do a little bit of research. It's actually very difficult to Google water fountains because all you get are water fountains. I don't know, I mean, the only other idea I came up with is maybe we fill them with gravel. That's probably not practical or realistic, but, so that's what we have. This is a must-do situation, at least as far as the decision from the city goes, that something must be done. And so I'm presenting it to you as, if there's concerns about it, that at least we move forward with something temporarily. And we can discuss it tonight. There's a lot going on at the mall. You guys know I've been involved, Robert and I have been involved with the work on the historic survey. In fact, we'll be moving forward. We signed the paperwork the other day, moving forward on the formal National Register nomination of the mall as a designed landscape. And with that, and my boss, James Freese, is here, and Rihanna Anthony is here with Parks and Rec. There really is a lot of attention within City Hall to what's going on the mall and how do we approach some of the things that need to be addressed. And there's a lot of them, and the BR will be involved in those discussions. So this is one of the things that we have to tackle, and there's several other things coming that we want to tackle. So actually, I'll leave it, then James, let him kind of fill in some of the blanks.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is James Freese, Director of Neighborhood Development Services. Appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. As Jeff alluded to, as the city manager announced, actually at the first city council meeting of August, City Manager Rogers announced that he is forming a downtown committee to look at all of the various issues that we're addressing right now with the mall. So it's my hope that with the work of this committee, which we are just starting to put together kind of a work program and kind of a process for how that's going to go forward, but that the work of this committee will help us move away from kind of piecemealing our approach to the various issues as they come up. We bring them before you, we bring them before various boards, committees, and decision makers, that we can move more towards a proactive stance and a coordinated stance, something that looks more like a management plan for the future and less like reacting to issues. So, and of course, my expectation is that the BAR will be engaged in that process as we move forward. So we're still very much in the early stages. We are, in fact, meeting next week to start to put more meat on the bones of this, but that committee is being put together, and I look forward to talking to you guys further about that. Really sharing this tonight just to give you guys some context as you guys go into this conversation about a specific issue. As Jeff mentioned, this was seen as something that needs to be done, that it can't really be put off any longer. It's been identified by both our ADA coordinator and the city's risk management office as an issue that needs to be addressed. But we are aiming to be more comprehensive in the future. So happy to answer any questions at this time. Not that I have a whole lot of answers at this point, more just laying out where we're going.
Okay, do we have any questions from the public, either here in the room or online?
We'll start with questions in the public. I see somebody here has raised their hand.
My name is Linda Abbey.
If you don't mind, ma'am, could you come to the
Yeah,
podium,
we need
please?
you to speak into the mic so people online can hear you.
I just have a question as to whether the grates should be removable because of the leaves and the debris that falls so that they can be cleaned. That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Does the city have a comment on the removability of the grates? Or?
Actually, at this point, yeah. I was going to go ahead and turn things over to Rihanna Anthony from Parks and Rec.
Great. Hey, Rihanna, and did you want to add on to for earlier discussion, presentation?
Sure. I'm Rihanna Anthony, Deputy Director of Parks and Rec. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Chair and the board. I'm actually very happy to be here to discuss the grades on the mall. As James mentioned, that it was instructed that we close the fountains, which is a eyesore at the moment. And due to that, it's because of an ADA issue and waste management issue. There has been a few complaints through the NDS department to Parks and Rec over the past years about people tripping and falling with inside fountain. So that was brought to our attention as well. We looked at different methods of meeting the ADA standards. And there was a lot of ideas within our team, the city team, coming up with different ideas, and we found that this will be one of the most recommended recommendation with the grades. And again, it will have to be removed because if you look at the motors sits either beneath the fountain or on the side of the fountain, so we need access to get in. So it will be removed when we do our maintenance and for leaves and to do cleanup. So that is a must part of our maintenance plan. So it will have access for us to take it off, clean, or even shut it down for the winter.
Great.
And Mr. Chair, just for the sake of members who are online, I'll give them the chance to ask questions as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have one attendee online. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. They're not raising their hand.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Can I just interrupt a second? We had 2 comments that were submitted by email. I just want to make sure that you all had seen those. And
Great. Do we need to read those into the record, or do you want to?
it might be helpful,
I
but
don't
I
have
just want to
them.
make sure they had been, okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
We'll pull those up and read them into the record at the comments from the public.
You mentioned maintenance. How often are the fountains in fact maintained right now?
At the moment, we haven't started our fountains up because it was shut down just before we start up with our fountain. So everything is working, but unfortunately, we do not want to switch it on because it is enclosed by barricades. So at any given time, we can get the fountains to work. But it is functional, and again, it is tested since it's chemicals. So we have staff that check the chemicals, especially in the big fountain, making sure that they are maintained and cleaned on a daily basis.
On a daily basis?
That's correct, yes. It doesn't seem that time. I know, because I know previously before COVID, we had a few gentlemen that actually put soap in it. So almost every day you'd see bubbles coming out of the big fountain. And again, it is a public space. Roughly around about 2,000 to 5,000 people walk by. And again, with the guidelines of the downtown mall, our staff comes in roughly about 5 o'clock. But we need to be off the mall with our sweepers and all that heavy equipment by roughly around about 10 o'clock in the morning. And it's very difficult to get staff, especially after 4 o'clock at night, to get them onto the mall to do certain fixes. But that is our maintenance standard, is to try to check chemicals once a day, making sure the fountains are well maintained.
You mentioned that there was this directive was given as from some concern from either the ADA coordinator or the risk assessment. Could you or do you know which provisions of the ADA they were concerned with, specifically what their fear is, or what are they specifically trying to address?
Okay, I'm not a profession. That's ADA specialty, so I don't know the code off the top of my head. But basically, if you look at the fountain is supposed to be interactive for everyone. But if you are in a wheelchair, there is a threshold. If you're in a wheelchair, you can't get to the fountain and play. And that's the ADA standard that says if it's for everybody to have the same access, we need to give everybody the same access. And that is why when you go with a wheelchair, you have to stop at a certain point,
Right.
whereby you'll be able to, right now you'll be able to be interactive with the fountain and get close up to it.
Is the city investigating any change to the barricades that prohibit access to the fountains currently?
Just repeat the question.
Is the city investigating any movement of the barricades that provide accessible access to the fountains currently?
Currently is our hope, the fountains, are you speaking about the 3 fountains that are enclosed with barricades?
Right.
The first step is to get approval from the bar. If we get the approval from there, then I can get specific drawings to get engineered according with the grades, and then the barricades will be removed.
No, oh, sorry,
Okay.
maybe I should be more specific. Currently, the 3 fountains would not be considered accessible because of the barricades that are erected by the restaurant owners, so close to that they do not provide accessible passage to and from the fountains. So yeah, I'm curious not about the temporary barricades, but the restaurant barricades that prohibit access to the fountains.
Good question. So just to articulate back to you, it's about the cafe space. So the
Yes.
cafe space. Okay. So I cannot answer that question because that is not. Whoops. That's not within my purview. That belongs to zoning in NDS. We don't set the standards as Parks and Rec to say where the cafe space is, but I'll definitely talk to our zoning
Right.
to see about those cafe spaces. I know there's 1 fountain that is, 2 fountains that is in a cafe space, so I totally understand where
Right.
you're coming from.
So
Yeah.
when you were talking about accessibility, you were really talking about the fountain at Central Place,
No.
correct? No?
I'm talking about the 3, because all 3 has, if you don't mind, if you can bring up the drawing, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at Central Place, there is sort of a lip around them, so a person in a wheelchair or even a walker can't get quite up to the edge of the
Yes.
water. And I thought that was, the other 2 don't have a lip on them, they just go down.
That's
Well,
correct,
But
yes.
also at Central Place, there are posts with chains
That's
Right.
to
correct.
keep
Yeah.
anyone from getting close to
Right.
the fountains.
That's correct. And the most
So-
important, sorry.
If I can turn that into a question, since we're in the question phase, in all the alternatives that you explored, did you explore installing posts and chains to prevent anyone from getting close to these fountains, as opposed to a grate?
We looked at chains. We looked at a barricade, like a clear glass barricade, totally around, talking to NDS. And the intent was when the fountains, and again, I can only go with what I read, and also from staff's recommendation was they wanted the water fountains to be part of play, interactive. And that's why we thought if we're going to put the change, then it's not interactive with the guest. And that's why we took those 2 off our recommended list.
So if I could to make sure I'm understanding the concern, it's on one hand, the drop that that creates a tripping hazard or a fall hazard, and then secondly, the accessibility of getting to touching the water fountain itself. There are 2 of the 3 fountains that have a lower cover over the second part of the basin, and I believe there's one that does not, that's more like this section. Is that any part of the concern the lower basin, or is it primarily the upper basin that's the challenge?
It's the upper
Okay.
base.
So in my, I don't know the specific provision of code that's being triggered here, but in my conversations with the ADA coordinator, what he's referred to in particular was the concern around the change in grade with no notification to somebody who's visually impaired.
Other questions from the board?
I'll just ask it as, I mean, these, so just to confirm, these modifications are going to be made to turn the fountains back on?
That's correct.
And what's the time frame for the city for doing that?
So the time frame right now, hoping that the city gets approval from the bar. Once I get that, I can then start getting RFQ out for someone to design these patterns. And from there, we'll be able to put the grades on. Timeline, roughly around about 3 to 4 months from now. Yep.
Is there a, has there been some kind of a recommendation, or is there a mandate, or is there direction for where the grate needs to be placed? I mean, is the idea that it has to be flush, or is that can it be at a certain point down from the lip, you know? And I mean, I guess the reason why I ask that is because there are stairs everywhere, you know, you can't avoid a stair. And that looks like, I haven't measured it, I don't know what the actual depth is, but that looks like with the lower well filled in, it looks like really what we're dealing with there is one, you know, maybe an 8-inch step, or a little bit higher, you know, kind of beyond what your typical step is.
But for a wheelchair, 1/2 inch is the highest
Yep.
it can go. And
Right.
if someone's gonna roll a wheelchair over the grates, it can't be any greater than a 1/2 inch.
Yeah, I guess that's my question, are we looking at a 1/2 inch or flush with the main?
Well, I think they're
lip?
flush.
Yeah.
But the design is flush.
Yeah, the way it's designed now, it's flush.
Just to also comment, great question, and that is why worked with the staff, Jeff, and one of his recommendation was option 2. As you can see, there's a small lip. So long that lip meets ADA requirement, we'll be able to also come up with that certain design. So we are open to the recommendations from the board.
I got another option.
Well, let's wait for comments, maybe.
No.
Okay, all right. Damn, I was gonna get out my T-square.
Do we have any other questions?
I sent to you, Mr. Gastringer, the 2 comments that we received.
Okay. Do we have any comments from the board? Any comments from the public, either in person or online? And then I'll read the email correspondence we got.
Do you wish to provide comment again for our members in the public here? And then online, we have one attendee. If you wish to provide comment, raise your hand. They're not raising their hand.
Okay, we did receive this email from Blair Williamson. Dear BAR, thank you for your service to our community. I understand the city is planning to modify the 3 existing stone fountains on the downtown mall with galvanized ADA compatible grading. Presumably this is to mitigate the risk of a person falling into the fountain. I've seen the details submitted for this modification, and I would ask that you require the city to hire one of the many landscape architects who have offices within a stone's throw of any of these fountains to help with the detail and make this modification more intentional and respects Halpern's design aesthetic. There are other materials that would be more compatible with the fountain, such as Corten steel. The galvanized steel will certainly look like an afterthought. I'm sure there's a way for a city to hire one of the local landscape architects without an RFP process, as this is such a small but important project. I would also venture that the new solution would encourage people to walk across the grate, potentially grabbing a heel and causing a fall. The original design makes it very clear that you're not supposed to walk through the fountain. You might also consider changing the perimeter stone coping to a highly textured stone to serve as a warning to keep the blind from falling in, similar to a concept of a warning strips in a crosswalk. I don't pretend to know the best solution to provide ADA compliance, but I know there is a better design decision to be made. Lastly, the orange plastic jersey barriers have been up for months, and I have just this past week seen the notice of BAR application We should encourage the city to be thoughtful with their closures, as we have missed at least half of the season with these fountains, and the mall retailers and restaurants are working hard to bring life back to the mall. Thanks in advance for your consideration. Blair Williamson. Secondly, we have a comment from Gina Wood. I am the owner of the Nook Restaurant and owner managing partner of the Nook Building, which owns the Nook Building at 415 East Main Street. My husband and I would like to register for in-person public hearing concerning the fountains on the downtown mall, one of which is directly in front of the Nook. Just to give you a heads up, I bought the Nook with several partners back in 2006 and bought out my partner several years ago. During the time I've owned the Nook, the fountain in front of my building has been a source of great distress and frustration. The fountain water has functioned only half the time, and that is a generous estimate. I have asked repeatedly over the years for it to be repaired or removed. Neither has happened. It is a constant source of garbage, natural debris, and human waste. I have to pay my staff every morning to clean out the dry fountain well. One day, about a week or so ago, I literally picked out 52 cigarette butts, along with to-go containers, plastic water bottles, and paper trash. During the times it has functioned with water, we arrived early in the morning to find naked people taking a bath, urinating and defecating in there as well. Putting some kind of grate over the fountains will only make it more difficult or impossible for us to clean up the mess. I look forward to the meeting on Tuesday. Thank you, Gina Wood. So I think that's comment from the public. If we have any comments from the board, sure we will.
Start with Jim.
I'm waiting for the design opportunity. And, all right, well.
Go ahead.
Robert, would you put it on page 89?
They're standing up.
So, I think it needs to be a temporary solution, just like James said. We need to buy time to consider the whole mall and all the issues and design solutions that are complementary and respectful of Halford's design. So this is just a temporary solution. I'm wondering why, instead of Jeff's great solution about a collar, but to avoid that, why we can't do an angled frame all around it and put legs on it at the corners or even other places, and that just be sitting in there, so that we're not even bolting something to the sides and it's completely removable. That's an option. We did it at the Pavilion, no, at the Hotel E. An idea.
I think that's not a bad idea. I think.
Thank you.
I agree. I agree. I think if we can figure out a way to make it temporary so that it gets incorporated, like Jody said, into a bigger scheme, makes sense. I think in terms of materiality, we would want to be careful to make sure it wasn't something that could potentially rust and stain the stone within the fountain, so that when we come up with a better solution, we don't have staining. I guess the open grate, one person from the public brought up the idea of somebody's heel slipping down in there, whatnot. I guess there are ADA compliant grates.
This is if it's a half-inch separation like it's called for, then that's ADA compliant.
So my thought there also just goes to, like, how does that impact the actual fall of the water? Does that then end up making it splash way further out into the surrounding paving, onto cafe, people sitting there eating?
It's a water feature.
It's a water feature that captured the water per its original design. So I just think that should be taken into consideration.
Well, it'd be easy to take one out and, just make one and test it and see what happens.
But there are plenty of, I think, architecturally friendly, I don't know what the right word is, grates out there.
Well, not surprisingly, I have a lot of thoughts about
You're
this.
the landscape architect, please jump in.
And I'm a landscape architect.
Yes.
dealing with these kinds of issues all the time. So it's our public realm. And I am really skeptical about the claim that this is an ADA issue. For one, and I went back through all of ADA last night just to even double check myself. And there's really nothing in ADA that I could point to that this would be in violation of. There's very clear visual difference before the drop. There's a textural difference. If you went to the Virginia Building Code, even that drop is allowable by Virginia Building Code. I think that if the city were really concerned about accessibility, they would not have allowed the barriers related to the restaurants to be placed where they are, because they are what are actually constricting the space and creating accessibility challenges. So I don't buy it that this is about accessibility at all. That's my reading as a professional, not as an ADA professional, as a landscape architect. But I think the bigger picture here is that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the fountains. There were several fountains that were shown in our packet. I'm not sure who selected those, but they were water that, sorry Jeff, I'm going to rail on those images. But those fountains are fundamentally different. Those are fountains that are projecting water up into the air that are on a flat surface that are designed to be run through. These are not that kind of fountain. This is a fountain that has several parts. It has a lifted up volume of stone, a really massive piece of stone that's hovering above the ground. The water doesn't shoot out of it. It spills out over the edges and then is given a texture by the shape of the stone, and it falls into a basin. The basin is actually part of that design feature. Seeing the water land in the basin is the way that it was designed, and I feel that it's designed to be sat next to for people to even encourage people to put their feet into. So the idea that we're making it more accessible by essentially chopping the fountain in half is also, I think, just a misreading of the original Halpern design intent. And this is something we got to get right. I know we want it, I'm not saying we don't want it to be safe. We want it to be safe, but this is a character defining feature of a really important American landscape that happens to be one of our most important in our city. It's one that the process of which made a pretty bold statement about public space, and that public space belongs to everyone. And over the years, that commitment to the public has been whittled away. The promise that was made between the city and its citizens with the construction of the downtown mall has been it's been compromised, and the fact that the fountains have not even been on, I feel, is a failure of the city to live up to that promise that was made by the construction of the mall. This doesn't solve any of that, doesn't speak to that really important, fundamental, foundational design dialogue that the mall had with its citizens. I think it's one that's based on fear of litigation and doesn't really respond to the design intention. I just note that in both ADA and the Virginia Building Code, there are notes about historic preservation, and there are notes about alterations to facilities that are eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, which we've just found out is the case. This is an important Halpern landscape. We shouldn't change it lightly, and we need to think about this as James said earlier, in a holistic way that really protects that relationship between the city and its citizens that is manifest in the downtown mall. So I'll get off my soapbox. I feel strongly against this as it's been proposed. I know that everyone is coming to it with best intentions to try to protect the public. I just feel we need to be really careful with this landscape.
If I could just add, and just for clarification, the mall is on the National Register. It is already listed. The current effort is in order to get, Robert, you said it much better than I did, but it's identified as part of the downtown historic district, and we're taking that a step further and more than just an acknowledgement of the Halpern design, but a detailed presentation will be part of the National Record or Register record of the contribution of Halpern to it. So just
now it's a contributing member to the
Right.
historic district. You're trying to get individual recognition.
Correct.
For the design. And looking at that picture there, Breck, your point is well taken. When
Yep.
you're putting up barriers that close to the fountain, you're requiring people to really go scoot by it and take a chance of falling in, or you know, stepping into that hole. And you're right, the problem that the city has created by leasing these spaces for restaurants and then requiring barriers to put up. I'm blaming it on the city. I don't mean to do that, but it's this situation
We're
that's
trying to
really
solve the problem
aggravating.
that the city
Yeah,
created.
yeah, that's.
On the flip side, the city, the mall for decades, a couple of decades, was tumbleweeds.
Oh,
And
sure.
by turning into, I know this doesn't sound great, basically an area of a gigantic, lovely, wonderful food court has attracted a lot of people downtown and revitalized it. So there's going to always be that tension. But that being said, I want to associate myself with every one of your remarks, Brett.
Well, I don't know how wonderful it is when I walk down the mall up and down, I try to find a place to sit. And I can't find a place to sit because all the chairs are.
Get a cup of coffee.
Are all chained up. You can't get into the places when they're not there.
I'd like to say bravo to Brett. I like the alliteration too, actually. I think I would a little bit dissent in that the mushroom and the square, smaller fountains. I can see how a visually impaired person might have a little bit more treachery with them than with the Central Place one, which I think was the aim of a lot of your comments, and that grates or something could be necessary here. But I would say that if a visually impaired person came down the mall and the fountains were on, they would know the fountain was in front of them because they could hear the sound of water.
Sure.
And they might even feel the feeling of water on your body, which you do if you get near a fountain. And especially those small ones, you can see how when it was working, it was splashing. You know, you could
Yeah.
walk by it and you would get wet, and that's pleasant on a warm day. With regard to Central Place, I completely agree with Breck. There is a lip there, and it's intended to give access to it, not to, the design of, I'm shocked that I've seen, I feel like I just saw this fountain in use a couple of weeks ago, but I'm now realizing that if there are bollards and chains around it, that it's been a long time. But I remember when people would put their feet in it on a hot day, and perhaps if we return the use of these fountains to a public purpose, you won't have litter. You know, you won't be tempted to throw or defecate in it, and maybe people will guard them better because they're just not empty vessels, you know, that are waiting to be bathed in or whatever. But people will care about them and use them.
And if they're maintained every day.
Yeah, and if they're maintained every day, as you've said, Mr. Anthony, so thank you for giving us that vision that these would be well taken care of again. But, you know, I'm of a divided mind about the grates that might work on the smaller ones, only because I know that the way, and the other condition that's been cited is the cafes and sort of when you go, when you're trying to cross the mall between these two cafes with their, divisions set up, you go very close to these fountains. And if someone were visually impaired or just rushing, I could see that it would be a little bit more of a hazard. Just, we don't have enough space opened up between them, and maybe zoning, as you said, or whoever manages cafes in the mall can next season, give a little bit more space around them and gives them a little bit more respect, which they deserve. But anyway, I think visually impaired would hear them if they were on.
Yeah, I also want to commend Breck's comments. It really articulates the frustrations that I was feeling with the proposal, not feeling like it really was a problem in and of the design. There were, as we've talked about, newer exterior forces turning it into a problem. So I was, reluctantly trying to figure out the best way around it. But I think the most important question right now is maybe a deeper thinking into, whether this needs to be done. And then I also wanted to thank both the letters, both the emails that came from the public. I thought they were both really well written and, different ends of the spectrum, but I think really well thought out, points of view. So thank you for your contribution.
If I could add, so a couple things just for you all to keep in mind. One, I will say I've talked to not a lot of people, but several people about these, and I'm alarmed by how many have suggested the city just remove them because the cafe spaces are more important. And I think the fact that I, as a city resident for the last 26 years and walked on the mall for that long and worked on the mall, didn't realize there were 3 fountains is, means we're not telling the story very well. That's, again, hopefully what we can achieve with some of this, what we're looking at relative to the Halpern design specifically. But I think it's understood that the mall has been altered. Maybe it's death by 1,000 cuts, just haven't been paying attention. But I think on the bright side is that because I've been involved in these discussions internally, I know that attention to the mall and an understanding of the mall is something the city wants to do. Brian Daly used to refer to it as this is a critical piece of city infrastructure and we need to treat it that way. And then I've been running with that since he said it. And I know I've seen with the folks above me a commitment to that. And this is a city-owned space, and that's what I've also had to tell people is that is not your space. The city owns that and leases it. And I think that maybe the public doesn't realize that it's their space. So I think in the discussions that we hope planned and will come to fruition, an evaluation of that space. And I'm not for eliminating the cafe spaces. I know that there are golden egg-laying goose in a lot of ways. But I do think that there are opportunities to have discussions about these spaces that have been sort of like these put in position where we have to do something like that. So, yeah, I don't know, just if I can offer that perspective from what I've been hearing from others, what I know internally, I'm optimistic about them all. And I look forward to that larger discussion. I know you all will be involved in it because I think the BAR is sort of the one group that has its finger on the pulse of all things, and hopefully you'll be able to help us when we move forward with this. So, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to give those 2 thoughts.
So is there a consensus that, I really, considering this has come from staff, and I know Jeff put some time into it, I don't feel like a deferral, a vote to deny rather is appropriate. Rather say, we defer this, is that action we should take?
Well, we can't defer it, right?
Right, or we can.
Yeah,
for
I-
us to give a little bit of guidance too.
Well, we could vote to defer it, but then the city would have to come back next month.
Right.
Right. So I,
So let them.
yeah, my, I don't know how well I expressed it, but I think that if you all defer it, and you can, some very, very clear direction needs to be sent in what you're thinking. It cannot just be, go try again. If there's something specific you want to see,
Well,
Well, I just-
I disagree with that. I mean, we review what's put before us. It's not our role to be design the solution.
I understand, and I'm, the other option is that you all can vote to deny it. It appeals to council, and now, in some ways, that's not bad. I mean, that's how the process works. If you all feel strong, I mean, it does put that decision in front of council. Just puts me in a weird position of having to say, to defend the VAR's position, but I think maybe if that were understood that you all are, you know, but so I think that, I don't know, I would just like to, as staff, and I think, I'll be very candid, I'm really enthused at the working relationship that I'm seeing that did not used to exist within City Hall about the mall. And I want to grab hold of that and not let go. So anything I can do to sort of keep that, some momentum behind that. And that was my recommendation for a grate that doesn't make a hole in the wall. So that was my very selfish reason for suggesting that.
Well, thank you. Thanks for saying that, and I agree. And so for Ryan and James, please don't take my my lack of enthusiasm for this particular solution to mean more than what it is. We really need to be good partners for this space and for this all of the downtown mall gives to our city. So we do need to forge a better relationship. There are some big long-term decisions to be made about the that will affect the longevity of the mall and the integrity of the original design. So we look forward to having that. We want to be partners in that. And to that extent, I would urge all of your colleagues to consider the whole aspect of the design, not just the risk management and but also the integrity of the original design.
But, yep, most definitely, totally understand. We'll definitely go back.
Mr. Chair, I wondered if we could thread the needle. There was a strong preference, I think, in the staff report that these be temporary and that they only they be reevaluated for. I would support installing the grates, as Mr. Lehendro suggested, on the lower tier of the two smaller fountains for a period of no longer than a year, only because of the access when people cut through, and I'd still like to see them be opened, but I can see that design solution working there. It also may address, and it's outside of our design guidelines, but it also may address some of the issues with trash and, I'm not saying it would resolve everything, but it may, with them sort of, these fountains being abused, for lack of a better word. And maybe, I'm kind of willing to support that. I can't support it for the fountain at Central Place. I think we need to see more of a design there. It's a complex feature, yeah.
It's not in this.
It's not in this.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you. So I sort of would support it, and I think then we could make a motion and then there could be some other suggested amendments.
Yep, you're welcome to make that motion. I will not support it.
Okay.
I will note that we're living with a lot of temporary solutions that are already on the mall that were supposed to be temporary, and that's I wouldn't support it anyway, but I'm hesitant to. I
guess I was hoping that moving forward with these grates would at least remove the orange barriers that surround these two smaller fountains and maybe get them.
I would suggest, or I would prefer, I would really like to hear more about the reason why these are necessary. And I don't think that's an unusual question to ask. It's been, I know everyone seems to be afraid of ADA and building code, but I think that should be addressed before we give into a solution,
And I don't think we have a building code official here this evening from the city. So we're putting you guys in a little
Right.
hard spot on that.
And they didn't cite any ADA
Yeah.
regulation.
You know, that, I put this on when I talk, I take fault for that. I did have a conversation with our ADA coordinator. I also know the city's risk manager had looked at this, and the question was, should they be here to speak? And I said that in my discussions, my understanding, the decision by the city to do this has been made, and that it's, you know, that explaining ADA requirements, and we all know that it's the complications of that. It aren't, you know, so I said that I just felt like that wasn't where we needed to be discussing this. It was, a decision was made. City manager's office wants this done, and based on the recommendations of those two staff. So my fault for not bringing them, but
Well, if they want it to be done, then they should just do it. We should deny it, and then it goes to the city council and they can do it. I agree that our considerations are the historic, you know, bones of the mall. Are they going to be violated if we go along in this process? And I think that Breck made a very good case that they would be.
I'll make a motion that seems to read the room. Having considered the standards set forth within the city code, including the city design guides for public design and improvements, I move that the proposed fountain grates don't satisfy the BAR's criteria, or not compatible with the downtown mall and downtown ADC district, and the BIR recommends that this application be denied.
Second.
I can interrupt two things. One, for a denial, I do want to state why. These, you know, reference what in the guidelines is doing that. Although I realize it's an unusual appeal situation. Second would be, assuming this does get appealed to city council, would the recommendation of the consideration of a temporary grading versus permanent, I don't.
I believe I just tried that, Mr. Warner.
No, I mean, as
It
a
hasn't been
recommendation to council in an odd way, but.
Let council do what it needs to do.
I mean, a friendly amendment, it does not maintain existing spaces and important site features for continued public use consistent with the original design intent.
What's the citation?
It's in the guidelines.
Well,
Pertinent.
citation in the guidelines.
Sorry, pertinent design review guidelines for public design and improvements, section B, plazas, parks, and open spaces, item 1.
Thank you. Call a question?
Can I add another friendly amendment?
Please.
That the proposed design is inconsistent with the original Halpern design intent for the fountains, because they obscure the visual of the and sound of the basin. They could create additional splash that hasn't been considered. There was something else, but I've lost it now. Yeah.
Call the questions?
All right. Everybody okay?
So may I clarify, when we vote aye, we mean we're denying it? That is correct? Okay, thank you.
Correct. Mr. Timmerman?
Aye.
Mr. Zemer?
Aye.
Ms. Lewis?
Aye.
I vote aye.
Aye.
Mr. Alejandro? Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Sorry.
Pleasure.
Ron, we'll talk we'll talk tomorrow. We'll get it all squared away. Thank you all. Appreciate your patience on that.
Just doing their job.
All right, next.
Trying to find it. Here it is. Sorry.
The armor roof.
Wait, I'm off base. This
All
is,
right, next.
this is,
All right, how are we doing? Is
yeah.
everybody doing all right?
We're 7 minutes ahead of schedule.
All right.
Ow.
How the hell did that happen?
Somebody did a good estimate on
Well done.
All right, we're up to 800 East Market Street? No.
No,
Sorry,
we're on the,
I'm off.
Key Center, my area.
The roof.
Yes,
Did you want
800.
to break, Sherry? I'm sorry.
I think we can keep going.
Okay. This is as I mentioned in the preliminary meeting, it's a COA request, although the applicant, the city of Charlottesville, is not asking for a action tonight from the BAR, but consideration of some alternatives and ideas that I'll let them present. This is the Key Recreation Center, the Herman Key Recreation Center. It formerly had been the National Guard Armory, constructed in 1937, and in the 1970s it was relocated down Avon Street. And in fact, the original armory was built where the police station is currently, and this building was constructed to replace it. It has been converted, or was converted, to a recreation center by the city, and following his death in 2004, it was renamed for Herman Key Jr. And I'm going to let Ms. Lewis speak to the importance of that name and in a second. And so what it has on it now, the existing roof is slate. We're fairly confident it's local, probably Buckingham slate. It appears to be original to the building. The discussion is about replacing that, and also there's two flat roofs on the front and the rear that just replacing the membrane, but they're not of any issue. So that's what the applicant will be talking about. And Ms. Lewis, if you would, just tell us more than I was able to find about Mr. Key.
Well, I knew him from serving on the planning commission with him. He actually served for 10 years, and he was a disability advocate during that time. But he had, the reason why the rec center was named after him was that he was the ringleader of the wheelchair basketball teams. And in fact, people that were not disabled would play in the wheelchair basketball teams because there was such a great camaraderie among the teams and a great kind of competition. People would put their butts in a wheelchair who didn't have to be in a wheelchair like Herman did. He grew up in Fluvanna. He was, the Key family in Fluvanna is really well known. He played football in high school. I don't know exactly what caused him to not be able to walk again, but he spent his life in a wheelchair, and he was just a really pleasant guy and kind of beloved, among the community. So it was an easy choice to name this place, where he was the ringleader of so many wheelchair basketball teams, including the Cardinals, after him. So
I think the piece that we could both add to that is that we're a little surprised that that explanation wasn't on the city's webpage. So if that's, I guess I need to find out who.
it would be great. It would be great if I'd emailed you if a plaque could be created and put on the outside of the building, celebrating him. I wrote to Mr. Warner earlier today. You like, I'm the only one in the room who remembers Herman, which is kind of mind blowing for me because he was on the planning commission for a long time and was a public figure. He worked for oh gosh, anyway, a disability advocacy group, and I'm forgetting what the name of it is, but it was a local group, and that's what he did professionally. But we want to remember people like him in Charlottesville. It isn't named after a national figure. This is someone who lived and breathed and made a difference in our certainly in our public decisions, because he called us out when we were about to make bad decisions about things like ADA or, about accessibility, of anyone who has a disability. So he just championed that and was relentless in reminding us of it at moments when we as public officials were going to do really stupid things and not thinking about how a lot of other people may be impacted by that. So anyway, so maybe a way of recognizing him would be great. I don't think there is a plaque there.
Thank you, board. Sherry, that was interesting. I had not heard that before, so thank you. And staff, thank you. I'm here to talk about the key roof replacement. It's not an exciting project. It may not even require PAR approval, but it might. We're looking at different options. It's a strange market out there. It's a strange market for slate in this community. We're working with our architect, Grimm & Parker, whose roof assessment in 2018 identified that this roof is going to need some serious, more than maintenance. It's either going to need to be replaced or peeled off and put back on. But there's a major project, we're aware of it. We have our funding for design this year, and we'll have our funding for construction next fiscal year, we hope. We just wanted to bring the conversation to you folks now, to talk about materials and to talk about what may or may not work. I've brought our architect, Jim, with us, and he's going to speak more articulately than I can about that. He understands the local market for slate, and he understands, of course, roof design. So with that, I'd just like to start a conversation about what could be or what can't be, and just let the conversation evolve from there and kind of give us some guidance, hopefully. And thank you, and I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Scott. I know a lot of you. A few of you may not know me. I practiced here in the city for a long time. And in fact, one of my early projects was to do a rendering for the first cafe on the downtown mall. I still have the rendering. It's stored away, but yeah, I saw them all from inception, and to hear you talk about it so passionately made me feel very good.
Those barriers that close
No,
to the
no, we
fountain?
didn't.
Oh, okay.
But I can tell you that my roommate, Charlie Kramer, and I got up in the middle of the night, and we drove to this end of the mall. I wanted to be able to say I was the last person to drive a car down Main Street. And I can't remember whether it was 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., but it was early in the morning. And we explained to the workmen what we wanted to do, and they were on board. So we drove through and put the barrier behind my piece of junk car. And I drove the old beater all the way to the other end of, there of course was no hotel, there was a field at that end of the mall. So, very
You weren't
different
streaking?
situation. No,
Okay.
definitely not,
Okay.
believe me. Although
Let the
that was
record
popular
show,
back then.
Mr. Boyd was the last person to drive a car down Main Street.
There you go. But we're here to talk about the roof on the Key Rec Center. I've had a practice here for many years, practiced as Hayward Boyd, and about 10 years ago, I merged my practice into Grimm & Parker. If you were to ask people what Grimm & Parker does, roofing is not the first thing that people would talk about. They would talk about libraries or schools, police stations, campus buildings, which is most of our work. But we do have one group that does nothing but roof replacements. We do a lot of those for the University of Virginia, the city, the county, the community college system, and we've dealt with a lot of slate in the last 7 or 8 years. MemGem, Thornton Hall, McKim. What's happening at the Key Rec Center is no different than what happened to all those buildings at UVA.
Usually, slate in the 1930s was put on with probably galvanized nails, but certainly steel nails, and over time, they rust out. The slate itself is fine, and sometimes you'll see a piece and it's just kind of like turned halfway, and that's where a nail is rusted through. Sometimes when both nails give out, that piece of slate will come crashing down. And in the case of the Key Rec Center, where we have pedestrians on both sides, particularly the side there approaching opposite City Hall Annex, you have people parking right where the slate falls down. And it's a problem. So I know there have been renovations to the building, one in the late 70s, that when it was converted to a rec center. I don't believe any work was done on the roof at that time. Then later, there was a window replacement. And then after that, we did a repair with the city, and then subsequently did another repair project. So you certainly can take pieces out and lift it up and put another piece of slate in and fasten it. The problem is when people walk on the slate, they break more slate. So this becomes a battle that, you know, after a while, the recommendation is, hey, this looks like a big problem. We think you need to take all the slate off and put new slate on. And that's where we are. We think it's time that this building had a complete removal and the slate replaced. There may be, we don't know exactly what's going on with the substrate. This particular substrate is a woodwill slaptectum, I believe. I don't know if it's the type with the metal edges or not. But when the light is just right, you can see a little bit of sagging in there. So we're concerned about that. At MemGem, when we took that roof off, we found rotten places. So we actually put a nailable insulation underneath to help span that. And we may want to do something like that here. But that's not the problem that we're facing. Problem is you can't necessarily get slate. Now the quarry, Buckingham Slate, has gone through several owner changes in the last 15 to 20 years. 30 years ago, you could reliably get slate. The orders came on time, and there was no question of supply. But in its current ownership, you might get slate, you might not get slate, because they're only producing slate in very small quantities. UVA's been fortunate to get slate in the last year, but they're not filling all the orders. So I did call the quarry, and I got something less than, oh yeah, we can do that type answer. So we're concerned about that. So if it needs repairing and we aren't sure we can get slate, the question that the city wants to pose to you is, would it be appropriate, would it be reasonable to discuss some other roofing material, such as some type of standing seam metal? Or do you feel that this is so important that we find a way to get the slate and we do a removal and replacement? When the slate comes off, even when workmen are trying to be very careful, they do break slate. And even if you're trying to salvage it, I don't know the exact percentage, but probably more than half, but probably less than 3/4 is what you could expect to salvage. So there's 8,000 square feet involved here. Traditionally, that's not a big order, but right now it's a big order. So not as bad as EPDM. There's a 12-month wait on that right now. That's just what we're dealing with. So we're here to provide you with information. So do you have any questions?
Great. I'd be astounded if we have any questions from the public. Are there any questions from the public? I'd welcome them, but I'm just not expecting
For
them.
members of the public who are here in person, it doesn't look like we have any questions, and then we don't have any attendees online anymore.
Okay, great. Thank
They
you.
gave up on us.
We outlasted them again. Any questions from the board?
So Jim, how reliable is an inspection by a drone to know
Mm,
what's
we-
going on up there.
We do use drone inspection, and we've used that on a lot of projects
Well, I
at
understand
UVA.
that's how this was done.
It's very reliable. We sometimes just get photographs, and sometimes we actually have the drone use photometry to give us actual measure drawings on the roof. But we have found them incredibly reliable.
So you could use a drone to tell the condition of the nails and whether or not this is a condition that is across the entire roof, or the broken slate are due to something else.
It can be due to weather.
Yeah.
Ice in particular
those
can get underneath it,
workmen.
and just through freeze thaw, there's something that happens that breaks corners and chips them in ways. It's can be a problem.
They were nailed down
But
too hard to begin with.
we did the last repair, and we did field observations during that period, so we got a good look at the nails then. And
Okay.
it seems to be consistently steel nails, and they're rusting in too, so they don't all fail at the same time. Thank God.
Okay.
So I was just curious, and I was the project manager for the Mem Gym roof replacement, so enjoyed working with y'all.
Thank you.
I was curious if y'all talked to anybody else other than the actual Buckingham Slate Quarry, because I know
Yeah, I talked to,
like James River and,
I did not talk to James River,
okay,
but I also spoke with two different roofing companies to see if some of them have
More
products stored away somewhere
Right.
that they don't tell everyone. And they were both skeptical that they couldn't reliably say, yeah, we can get this later.
right. And I think there's a Vermont Slate company that actually owns a quarry in Arvonia, so you might try talking to them too, just ideas. Yes, it is a difficult spot we're in.
It is it's a new ball game,
Yes.
that's for sure, so.
And what's wrong with the ridge cap or the ridge detail that it needs to be changed? I read that somewhere.
I'd have to go back and reread the report, Jody.
Okay,
You
it said
busted
something
me.
about it had to be reinstalled to weather properly.
Well, there are two ways, as you know, to cap roofs. One's with a metal cap, and the other is one piece of slate overlapping the other. And I can't recall whether the Key Rec Center has the metal cap or whether it's overlapping. But either way, if it's loose or not there, that's a problem. And with Tectum underneath, it's very susceptible to moisture.
Yeah, I would just like to see the proposed detail to make sure, and see what's there, to make sure we're not gonna be changing the appearance significantly.
The image.
The only image I've seen is this, of the entire roof. I've not seen any details.
At the front page of the report,
That's the only one.
now go up, Art, to the front page of the,
Typically, Mike Thomas would be here
sorry.
in my
Email it to me,
place.
Jeff.
He is our
The front
roofing
page,
specialist,
my
but
report.
Mike has COVID, so he's not out tonight, so.
Okay. Yeah, that was mentioned as a problem, the ridge, and also the valley flashing, and apparently not enough distance in between the roof and the side material, covering
Right.
material. Something about that was inappropriate.
It's not per the SMACNA manual, but
Okay.
it's been there for,
Again, if these are details that are obvious, then we'd like to know that what's being proposed isn't going to significantly change the appearance of the building.
The timeline y'all are discussing is about a couple of years though, right? I mean, you're going to have some thoughts on our part, but then in another year, you'll have the budget assigned. So it's 2 years out before anything is going to be done, right?
I believe are funds available now.
That's
Is that,
design money.
July
Sorry.
1st, construction money
Yeah.
is available, so we'll be bidding out this time next year.
Next year, okay. So one could hope that the supply issues might go away in that time period,
They could.
possibly.
They could.
Building your plan on hope, though, especially
Okay.
with
Well-
the, amount of work that goes in putting an IFP together and getting design documents, burning through your design budget, and realizing you've made mistakes.
It's becoming a real problem.
So circling back around on availability, we all love Buckingham slate. Are there other slate options?
You mentioned Vermont slate. The products that come from Vermont, we find to be more brittle,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't recommend that the city go down that avenue. We generally don't recommend the faux slates. We experience them cupping and fading. I think for maybe if this were a residence and it was a smaller installation, that might be fine, but I don't think that's a good solution for this. I guess you could always put composition shingles on it, but that somehow feels degrading.
Yeah, no.
I think a pre-painted metal with a standing seam might be an appropriate roof, but that might not be acceptable to the BAR. I don't think that of course, turn-coated steel's not available anymore, so that's not an option, a traditional field-painted roof. We could always get the Freedom Gray, but I'm afraid that would be budget challenged. So that's a copper with a turn coating on it. I think that would be a budget buster just from the get-go. So.
Well, we're kind of rolling into comments, and I'll invite if there any public out there wants to comment, just hold your hand up. I guess for some context, our guidelines for roof repair like this, or roof replacement, is found in Chapter 3G, number 7, which is pretty clear. It says, when replacing a roof, match original materials as closely as possible. And it specifically calls out an example of, well, in this case, replacing a standing seam metal roof with asphalt shingles, but saying avoiding that because that dramatically alters the building's appearance. It does suggest that artificial slate is an acceptable substitute when replacement is needed, and we have approved that. In some cases, it has been largely residential. To
Yeah.
my mind, it's only been residential projects where that's been approved. So I think, at least when related to our guidelines, I think that's the big question before us, if an artificial slate would be acceptable, if it's an important enough design feature that slate needs to be maintained, or if another material would be viable.
So you talk about salvaging slate. Do you have a percentage that you think you'd be able to salvage and potentially buy new to match?
Well, you're involved with those projects. What is the university? I mean, I know we've been fanatical on all of our jobs at UVA about salvaging all we can, and we don't get it all.
No.
I know that. I'm thinking 60 to 70% would be good.
Right.
If they're not careful. And that takes extra effort.
Sure. And I just I'm curious, because one of the solutions that's proposed is to salvage slate, but then use faux slate to supplement. And I just think that sounds odd.
That was me.
Okay.
Throwing out the
Okay,
permutations,
that's not your
the
recommendation then.
possibilities.
I won't put those words in your mouth.
But a 60% could be harnessed if perhaps
Yep.
there's one material on one side and another material on the other.
But
Both slate.
put all new on one side and
Right.
maybe put salvage material on the other.
What is the difference usually between the slate?
Although the Buckingham products tend to not fade as much as others, there is some discernible difference. You either have to blend them fairly well or separate them, because most people would notice that.
Right.
Which you can see in that photograph, I think, on page 18, and that's 123 in our document. I think you can see the replaced.
Yeah, it's had 2 replacements that we're aware of, so.
How many, question for Scott, how many city buildings do have slate roofs?
We have the Art Center down the road.
The what?
Duffy,
Oh, okay.
What about Gordon Avenue Library?
Whatever library, and 2 schools have a deal of slate, maybe 50%. That would be Vernon Ray and Johnson.
Oh, wow.
They gonna get new roofs anytime soon?
Yes.
Can we get 4,000 square feet from?
So you can see our desire for some guidance.
I'll just start. I am not offended, I'm biased towards it and not offended by EcoStar or artificial slate. I have it on my home. I installed it 17 years ago. I would agree that it does slightly, I'm not sure I would use cup, but I don't think that it, retains its shape
Right.
perfectly. But you'd have to look really close to see that. And I have a 1-story home. And most of the homes that it's used on are 2 stories because, the further it is away, the less you're able to detect it. But most people that see my home, and I don't have a huge setback from the street or anything, really do think it's slate to this day. And it is not, they really haven't discolored. And I've had no problems with any of it sliding, moving, rearranging, anything like that. So, I would note, I don't really love the idea of mixing and matching, doing one side with EcoStar artificial and one with the other. But I would note that if you look at the orientation of the rec center, one is definitely a southern exposure that must get a whole lot more, I would imagine we don't have any data in front of us about what the shape of this roof is in. You said you sent a drone up, we've got one picture, it was 4 years ago. So we really don't have any kind of forensic data about how many tiles are missing, slipped, what the condition is. That's why we're all a little bit like wondering why this is coming before us. We know it's necessary, we just don't know how to quantify what the problem is. And certainly if it were a small repair problem, I think a lot of this board would, according to our guidelines, use the same material. But if it's a really vast issue, we just don't have information, I feel like, in front of us to make a good decision. But I would say that I'm not against EcoStar. This is quite a tall building. I doubt anybody, I don't know where in the city you could see it, actually, except maybe if you were up on the SNL building. But honestly, there are not even any current structures that look down on it. I don't think you can see it from any side. On the pavilion side, you're way far away.
Yeah, you can see it from the ground.
It's a
Yeah.
fairly
Oh,
steep
it's
slope.
You can? Oh,
It's about
okay.
9,
Then I
12,
withdraw
10, 12 pitch.
Yeah, it's very, it's very
Just
visible.
because of the pitch. Anyway,
Yeah.
well, I would be in favor of it if we knew that it was kind of, I'm reluctant to give up the slate, but 8,000 square feet is just a maintenance
Right.
monster, for the city.
It's quite a bit.
And I'd frankly rather use our tax dollars elsewhere. If slate is difficult to get, we know it's expensive to get. And is that the best use of our tax dollars right now at a time when, we could be opening up fountains on the downtown mall and putting money to schools and, we have a big rearrangement of the local school system. There are just a lot of projects, and I'm sure I'm singing to the choir right here. So I would be open to it.
To synthetic.
To
Yeah.
to artificial.
Yeah.
Just what is the cost difference between artificial and regular slate at this point?
I don't know.
Okay.
I know that the price of regular slate has doubled in the last year. And, you know, if you can get it. So it,
That's the trick.
it actually in the last few weeks has come down a little bit, but it's,
Can you get the artificial slate?
I haven't asked. So that's a great question.
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
falling back into the same category with EPDM and other manufactured products, and they're 12 months out.
And it's petroleum-based.
Yeah.
Well, I might put it to the board this way. Does anybody feel like changing to a standing seam metal roof or other roofing system would be appropriate?
No.
No.
That's
So-
very useful guidance.
Okay. So I think our
Pretty
guidelines
clear.
are pretty clear, you know, slate or stick with it, or if the synthetic
Okay.
slate might be appropriate if, you know, if we understand the details correctly in the product. And I think the guidelines are written to really maintain the look and feel of that structure.
Thank you.
Is it actively leaking? Maybe a question for Scott.
It's a shame Rihanna left it, I probably could have got an answer on that.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay.
I don't know that it has active leaks,
Okay.
but it's gonna be a hard one to deal with, if they do start.
Right.
So are you planning to put an EPDM underneath the new slate roof as a precaution?
Probably not, but we've got to think a little bit about where the dew point is with that tectum roof, tectum deck. And before changing the assembly, I think we need to do a little calculation on that. Because I don't want to trap moisture in the tectum. That would be a really big problem.
The
What did
report
you-
said the tectum was in very good shape.
That was 4 years ago.
What did you do at Men Gym? Did you put
It wasn't EPDM. I mean, it was
No.
probably like a frog skin.
with
or-
that green frog?
Yeah, like
stuff?
that.
Yeah, and
Sealed-
then had
self-sealing.
nailable
Yeah, ice and water shield.
deck, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
We also don't know what we have above the deck, whether we have something decent to nail into. So there's some forensic work we need to do.
Sounds like you all need to do a probe and find out what you're really dealing with.
Some disassembly would help.
Yeah. Oof.
So,
It would be interesting to know the price difference too. I mean, you know, keeping the slate, there's a sustainable side of that. I mean, keeping 50% of that roof, that's a good thing, you know, and so I'd be interested in, you know, understanding what the price difference is between half the roof being a real slate versus the whole roof being the artificial. And then a better understanding, I guess, of where the artificial is in its lifespan these days. You know, can you count on 50 years? Can you count on 70 years? Probably not.
probably not.
Yeah.
Does that give you what you need?
I think so.
Thank you.
So,
Run out of power.
so was this a
Thank you so
proper
much.
COA
I
application?
think this is a
It was a preliminary discussion.
preliminary
Okay.
discussion.
Just.
So no action to be taken.
Okay, I'm just looking at
Thank
this.
But we really do appreciate you coming
Yeah.
and getting this
Yeah,
out
thank you for
ahead
checking
of time.
with us.
Thank you for just being very forthright, because that really tells us a lot. Gives us great direction as to where we need to go from here. Appreciate it.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very
Good
much.
luck.
Appreciate
We appreciate your feedback.
Do we need a 5-minute bio break? Someone had already did.
The old female.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Well, he already took his.
I took my break. I couldn't wait for you all.
I mean, we only have a few more matters.
Okay, let's keep going.
I need some sustenance.
Jody's gonna stuff his pockets since the last meeting.
We're gonna figure that out. I will fete him appropriately at the at an appropriate time, with all the
Okay.
pizza he wants.
So we're up to 210
We are
West
at-
Market Street?
Yes, and I honestly, I hope this is an easy one. I, under the circumstances.
You jinxed it.
But, let's see. Yeah. So this is this is a demolition request for 210 West Market Street. This is the, currently at the site is a former gas station built in 1935, was renovated sometime in the mid-1960s. The angled corner there was added, and it originally it was sheathed in a metal panels, gas station panels. And so what you see now is just kind of the parging that was underneath over the cinder blocks. It is a contributing structure. However, all structures in the downtown ADC district were designated as contributing, and that the distinction is that being a contributing structure, then it requires the BAR review for any demolition. Of course, anything that's constructed on the site is reviewed by the BAR, but only contributing structures is the demolition reviewed. So as I noted, that west wing there, which you see on the left of the photo, was constructed. I'm sorry, the west wing, which is on the right, to the right, that's the sort of gas station there. You can see some of the at least one of the bays is still there. Built in around 1935. That's the best I could determine from the city directory. Prior, as early as 1886 and until the early 1930s, there was a series of small dwellings here, and really an interesting group of individuals in the sense that they were, some of the households were a couple people, at times were up to 8, 9, 10 people living in a house. This was a black area, and for instance, the Martins, Henderson and Ida Martin lived there from, looks like, late 1800s all the way up until after 1930. So, so that's what was there before. Noted in here, the 36 city directory lists this as a service station owned by Thomas Miller. By 1951, it was Sam's Golf Service Station. And by the 1970s, if not prior, the structure was occupied by Brown's Lock and Safe, and they continued to operate out of there. In reviewing the guidelines for demolitions, I could just very quickly go through those. One of the questions is the age of the structure of the property. As I noted, the west portion of the building was constructed around 1935. The east wing constructed around 1965. Whether or not it has been designated as on the National Register, it is listed on the National Register inventory. This is one of the really old surveys from the city, I think late 70s, early 80s, and so I'm not always clear. Something might be on the inventory, but it's not clear if it's was identified as contributing. But my assumption is that it is, but I'm not so sure. Whether to what extent the building and structure is associated with a historic person, architect, master craftsman, historic event, no known associations. Whether the building or structure or any features represent an infrequent or first or last remaining example within the city, they're not applicable. There's no such features or materials with this building. Whether the building or structure is such old or distinctive design, texture, material, et cetera, that could not be reproduced. The There's nothing about the building that is remarkable in the sense of craftsmanship or materials that could be easily duplicated. It's not a cinder block building in Charlottesville is not unusual. And number 6, to the degree to which distinguishing characteristics, qualities, features, and materials will remain, the building will be removed in its entirety. And one of the questions is whether and what extent the contributing structure is linked historically or aesthetically to other buildings or structures within the design control district, or is it one of a group of properties with, is there a concentration of buildings here? And as I said, the 1935 gas station corresponds to really kind of an interesting boom in automobile dealerships and gas stations throughout the city. And it's I think I was talking to Robert about it. It was kind of surprising the number, considering we didn't have that many cars. It seemed like gas stations were going in all over town. So it's a history I probably need to sit down with Richard Guy Wilson and explore. But we had a lot of these constructed between 1920, 1950s. However, unlike West Main Street and Preston Avenue, this building here, it's not associated with a cluster of similar buildings. And I note on the staff report, there's the remaining auto-related buildings from this period. We do have several in the city. And then I think the overall condition of the building and structure, that's not in question. This is the demolition is requested in order to facilitate redevelopment of the site. And now I noted earlier, I don't know what the plan is for this, but and the building may well remain in use until that time. But the request is for just the demolition. It's not a function of safety of the building. And then whether and to what extent the applicant proposed means, methods, plans for removing, et cetera, et cetera. It's the building, again, its proposal is to raise the entire structure, so no elements, features, or materials will be retained. The one thing I did note in the staff report, and right there, Robert, that's the south wall. It was a little unusual to see so that local stone as the foundation wall. It doesn't correspond to a previous building on the site, but my gut tells me it was probably on the site. So I think, simply as possibly a recommendation for whatever gets built there, we do have that example down there on Old Preston, and up Market Street, there's some low walls that use a similar stone. Possibly that's a recommendation to be incorporated into whatever new goes there. And I had a couple of recommendations in the recommended motion. Yeah, and so in the approval, when you all reviewed 218 West Market, that demolition, there were some conditions that you applied. I've sort of offered something similar in kind of two options here. One be, the staff approval, well, the BAR, in the previous one, the condition of approval was that the applicant, as always, provide a BAR documentation of the existing building. And I noted here, in addition to the photos provided, documentation include dimension floor plans and elevations. And we have some very good examples of a simple documentation that's been done that we've used. And you've also, for 218 West Market, you required that the demolition was contingent upon an approved building permit for the construction of the new building. So it was anchoring sort of the, I think the concern was just don't want an empty lot, don't want to drop a building and have it sit there empty. This site's somewhat different. This is a small building, and again, I don't know the circumstances with the businesses that is using it, but I thought maybe another way to do it is that if it was to be demolished without something new approved there, that at least the the treatment of the site would come to the BAR for approval. So just not a gravel lot or, a place where they stockpile, fill dirt. So, so I suggest that the BR consider as either a condition or a recommendation that the redevelopment of the site incorporate the stone elements that reflect the stone foundation wall at the south elevation. So those are my suggestions. I don't know which. None of the Jeffs are here.
Virtually by Jeff, right?
There he is. Oh, you're a big head. Looks great.
And hopefully we can figure it out.
I'll take that as a compliment. Thanks, everyone. I'll be brief. The application, Jeff reviewed the points that we made in the application, that the building seems to meet all of the acceptable criteria for demolition. It is within an historic district in and of itself. The structure doesn't appear to have any historical significance or architectural significance. It's been changed quite a bit over time. I'd like to, and I'm happy to talk further about that, but I think that the guidelines for considered demolition, we meet all of the acceptable guidelines for that. I would like to talk a bit about why we are asking for this now, what the immediate plans are for the property, because I'm sure that's a big question right now. The applicant for the demolition permit is Heirloom Development. Heirloom is the developer that owns the adjacent site at 218 West Market with the Artful Lodger on it, and is looking at the possibility of including this property as part of a development on 218. The current owner signed the application. There is an agreement to move forward with sale of the property under a number of conditions. One of them is if the building can be demolished so that it could be developed for greater density, more retail on the site, as is what the city of Charlottesville says it wants in its downtown core. So this was a similar situation at 218 West Market with the Artful Lodger. Heirloom Development did not own it at the time, but it was one of the conditions for moving forward with the sale of the property. So in this instance, this is just one of those moves. I would offer that we would be more than willing to make a condition for the demolition the same as was done at 218, which is an approved building permit must be in hand before the building could be demolished. We don't have any intention of taking this down if a sale is made. I don't know that the current owner has any intentions for the building, but certainly if this is the case, we wouldn't take the building down until we were ready to move forward with a construction project. I would say that's probably served the city pretty well in the instance of that condition, in the instance of 218 West Market. Nobody has any intention of taking that down at this point. We are in the throes of trying to figure out the design. And so it's not as though that developer has gone away. We are, with COVID and with costs ever increasing for construction, we're really trying to wrap our head around what the project would be at 218 West Market. And this property being available is something we would like to consider as part of that development. I don't need to remind you, but for the public, it's important to understand that anything that gets built here would have to be approved by the BAR. We don't have anything to propose at this time. But the guarantees in all of this are that the BAR would have to approve anything that gets built on this site and or the adjacent site. Before anything gets torn down, we would need an approved site plan and building permit. So that's that's the overview of the project. I would like to ask, if possible, that if approval is given, that it be given for the longest time frame possible, which I believe is 18 months. This is a long-term project. As you know, we had to return for approval to demolish in the future the Artful Lodger project, because this is taking time to consider, but also because the process with the city, in order for the certificate of appropriateness for the demolition of the Artful Lodger to be effective, we needed an approved preliminary site plan. And one was submitted to the city, which was really a placeholder. And the length of time for processing by the city these days is extremely protracted and long. And so if we could get the 18 months, whatever the maximum allowable is, it would be appreciated. We'll just not have to return to you quite so quickly. I think that's all that I have to say. I'm happy to answer questions or tell you more if you have questions about the project.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Do we have any questions from the public, or do we have any other public online that would ask?
One member of the public who's here in person who has a question.
My name again is Linda Abbey, and I know you, Jeff. I have questions about Market Street and the effect that these buildings, both at 218 Market and this one, would have on Market Street, because it's so narrow, and these buildings would rise up 9 stories. And I think that the sidewalks are narrow, the street's narrow, and the noise would be incredible when the emergency vehicles go through or the boom cars go through. I'm really worried about the light and the shadow of I'm talking about the sunlight and the shadow in all the area around these buildings. These buildings are going to be massive, and they're also the gateway from the west to the mall. And we've got already a massive building at the Code Building and a massive building at the Omni, and this is going to be a third massive building, and it won't go away for at least 50 years. And I'm also worried about the effect of apartment units. There's 136 proposed for Market Street, the Artful Lodger site with 56 parking places. I'm worried about the traffic and the parking. And the affordable housing issue, which everybody talks about, is non-existent here. 8 units in 136 doesn't work. The intersection at the corner of Market Street, High Street, and Old Preston Avenue is going to be horrendous. And the entrance from the mall to the west, as I said before, is going to be blocked by 3 huge buildings. I think that before you approve the demolition, that a really good solution for these problems needs to be presented. And otherwise, I think that it's going to be a huge mistake for the city to build it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Any other comments from the public or questions from the public?
We don't have anyone
No?
else
Okay,
online.
questions from the board. Comments from the public? No? Comments from the board? I'll just respond a little bit in my comment to some of the concerns raised, that when the board previously, and Jeff mentioned this too, when the board previously reviewed the demolition request for the Artful Lodger project, it was left to be contingent on approval of the building design. So tonight our conversation will be about the demolition request. But that does not mean that we, we give up any overview or application of our guidelines towards that project in the future.
In terms of the 18 months requested, is that something we can vote on, or is that a staff
I think that's a
determination?
code issue.
Oh,
Our code, it's 18 months, is a 18-month period of validity, and I can, in consultation with the NDS director, we can grant a one-year extension, or certainly the BAR can, but we are allowed to extend that.
so that's handled administratively?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff and I just need to make sure it's on our calendar. We missed one on 2/18, but it's relatively simple.
Go ahead, Chair.
Just comment that I think this application does satisfy all of the criteria for demolition. I wouldn't say that I don't have a twinge of regret seeing another little blast from the past building, like the Watchmakers building on Water Street, gone from the landscape. Just as representative of another era of downtown. So, a little twinge of sadness there, but I do believe it meets the criteria, and I'm ready for with a motion whenever the rest of the board is.
Well, I would just note that because one of our criteria when considering demolition requests, and I had it circled here, Chapter 7B, demolition of historic structures. Number 2 is the public necessity of the proposed demolition, and I do believe that this meets the criteria. But because of this specific notation and also Mr. Dreyfus's suggestion, I do think that it is in the city's interest, in our interest, to include that contingency for an approved building permit, just as we did for the Artful Lodger. So I'm definitely in support of that approach.
I told Mr. Timmerman before our meeting started, we demolished an entire community in Charlottesville and had nothing to replace it with. And I think we need to learn from that and never do that again.
Want to proceed with the motion?
Hey.
If you've got it queued up, if you can get a microphone.
Having considered the standards set forth within the city code, including the ADC district design guidelines, I move to find that the proposed demolition of 210 West Market Street satisfies the BAR's criteria and guidelines and is compatible with this property and other properties in the downtown ADC district, and that the BAR approves the application is submitted with the express condition that the demolition permit not be issued without a building permit being previously issued by the city.
I suggest it be, you refer to the condition 1 and condition 2.
Condition 1.
Go up about 8 lines, sorry.
Oh, got it, okay. And, it's not loading, I know. Hang on a second. Oh, here, I think I've got it, hold on. For some reason, it's just not loading. Somebody's hogging up the data in this room. Okay, I'll borrow.
Jody's streaming a movie over here.
Seamers. I'm sorry, what?
James is watching himself dance. Got more
He
bacon.
is.
Here, I'll just read.
The applicant needs to provide the BAR documentation of the existing building. In addition to the photos provided, we'd like to see dimension floor plans and elevations if they exist, similar to documentation provided for 1532 Virginia Avenue, January 2019. And I've had the second condition already, I think, so.
Second.
All right, I'll call the vote. Mr. Timmerman?
Aye.
Mr. Zemer?
Aye.
Ms. Lewis?
Aye.
Mr. Lehindro?
Aye.
Mr. Bailey?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye as well. Motion passes. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate the time. Now you can get rid of my big head. Have a good evening.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll quickly, I'm gonna jump into this, and I think, is Keith, I feel bad, he's been stuck here all night, I was hoping.
So have we, though.
Sorry.
I
feel a lot of
I'm sorry.
I did. Because really, what we have here are, as I had mentioned, I thought there was a demolition question. But the real question I had, primarily was about this parking in the front. And I know, and Keith's provided some very good precedent and what's going on over there. I guess it's one of those, to me, it's not much of a question, but I know that it can be a sore topic sometimes, putting parking lots in front yards. I have talked to Keith about, there is an ordinance provision of, it cannot occupy an area of in excess of 25% of the front yard, so they understand that. And I was hoping with this, because this being in a conservation district, sorry, very quickly, the house was built in 1929. And it is contributing to the Rugby Road Historic Conservation District. There is provision in the code for the conservation districts which allows administrative review of applications that have previously been reviewed by the BAR if the BAR authorizes final review. So I'm hoping that in this conversation, again, no discussion of the demolition, that's a non-topic, and the addition to the rear is, again, not subject to BAR review. So really just, if you all had any questions, issues, concerns about the parking as presented. And I don't know, Keith, if you want to, do you have any questions for Keith?
Sat here for so long.
Questions, or, I know this is preliminary, so I wasn't really planning on presenting per se, but happy to discuss it.
Again, with the goal of being, from this conversation, I have, you all can allow me flexibility for administrative review.
Would you like us to make a motion to that effect, that?
No, I'm
with
okay with
that, I
this.
mean, after we've given comments and insight?
Yeah, I mean, yes, certainly have the the series of conversation, but the objective would be, and I don't need a motion, I think you can all express that to me.
Basically, I found the precedents to be completely persuasive.
Yeah.
I mean, you're looking around, all these other houses are much like that, and I didn't see any problem with it.
Yeah, you're the only one who doesn't have it.
Right.
So I will admit that sometimes I put things on the agenda and then I get to look at it and go, no brainer. And I agree with all of you when the pictures were worth 1,000 words, but here we are.
I do have a question, not because I agree with the documentation, but even just as we're always getting in touch with our guidelines, I don't know that there's anything in the Historic Conservation District guidelines that we could use to even review it, even if we didn't like it.
Fortunately,
Is that correct?
fortunately, yeah.
So it's really only about buildings and very little outside.
It's a good thing we like it.
Good thing Keith's been here for 3 hours.
Well,
So does he even need to apply for a COA?
Well, I mean, Jeff's point was, and we had this over at Park Market on Park Street. I don't remember any of you being on board at that time, but it was brought up, parking in front of the house was an issue then. And, so when you do it, it sets precedent. And
It
so,
does.
but in that instance, there was very little precedent. In this instance, there happens to be quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
So, it seems prudent to have it in front of you and
Deeper setbacks.
Well, thank you for coming forward and talking with us about it.
yeah.
It looks like a nice project.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and they're a great couple, want to be in the city, and so. Yeah.
I would just, as a general matter, not specific to this, but just say that as we look to work on our zoning ordinance amendment, that the thing that has to give is density, and, you know, preferences for relegating parking to the back of lots is probably going to take a back seat to creating density and more units and other, you know, more intense development of lots, even in residential areas such as this, where you don't have that sort of density. But,
Right.
I mean, I think that, you know, design preferences that are probably of maybe another era for the city soon, our zoning ordinance will drive that. And then I think that, not necessarily historic conservation districts, but other design guidelines that we have will probably also need to be reevaluated for that sort of what will look like an antiquated preference in the look of design. You know, whether we politically want to support that sort of density or not, I think it's kind of inevitable that down the road that our guidelines will need to look at certain things. So anyway.
Well, as I recall, this is a designated for medium residential density, something higher than the
In the
general
zoning ordinance?
residential. Yeah,
Mhm.
in the new Rugby Road.
So do we need a motion to?
I don't.
No.
This was just a preliminary
Okay.
discussion.
So
Okay.
I take it that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can, just
Yep.
as presented, I can handle this with administratively. So I just want
Sounds
to
great.
ask you, did you, I don't know, looking at the photos of that old garage, looks like they took the wall out and
Yeah,
just completely.
whoever was there before, I mean, I grew up here, I knew the people who lived here, and I remember they did work on it, took the garage doors out, used it for.
It was more one of those like, okay, what are we looking at? And it's like, no, this thing's been changed, so I'm glad I read it right. All right, well, thank you, and I hope you had an exciting evening.
It is never a bad thing to see the process.
You're so kind.
All right, Keith, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, I had no other items. Nothing to bring up unless anyone else did. I just had a quick comment I wanted to make. I wanted to say, first off, Jody.
We don't have another item?
Nope, we're done.
The Locust Avenue?
No, that one I scratched.
That was,
'cause I
we
just-
did that for the
Yeah,
preliminary.
Oh, did it fall down already?
Well,
Can you get rid of the one that's next door to my house too
I-
while we're at it?
it's just like I had said earlier,
I wouldn't trust going in there to take a photograph.
I'm just happy I got those other things that we took action on straight tonight. I have mentally not been here, but I wanted to just say, Jody is leaving us tonight since we're not going to have our emergency meeting. We had Tim and Carl step down. Well, their seats expired in the middle of pandemic. We never got together with any of them, and I know.
So you're saying a party at your house?
Well, we're working towards that. To see.
People
It's
stop.
yeah.
Need to stop getting COVID, right?
That's right. Stop getting COVID, please. And but I just Jody, I know we should send you off better than this, and I apologize, but I wanted to express to you that you've been a tremendous mentor, and you've been a tremendous therapist. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is, you and I also work on the entrance corridor stuff, and while I don't have a lot of entrance corridor review that goes to the planning commission, you've certainly been involved in those, so I probably spend more time with Jody on design issues than the rest of you, and but I just wanted to say, yeah, I wrote notes. I said, I'm just grateful for your guidance. I'm grateful for your patience. And I'm above all just grateful for your knowledge and what you've helped me in my transition in this job. And I owe you. So
Oh my
if you
gosh.
need your grass cut or your house painted and called.
We all have a lot to thank you for, Jody.
Well,
You've
you're very
really
kind.
helped us see buildings in different ways, and seeing your passion for buildings of all eras and styles and types, and it's just been eye-opening, and we will miss that experience on this board.
Jeez, I'm choking up. Thank you. It's been an honor, privilege to serve with you all. I wish you the best. And thank you, Jeff, for your kind words. Robert, best of luck to you. Yeah. So I will miss you all, but you're getting
Well,
Carl back.
we're on TV. You can or you can come and
Jody,
join us.
there's always room for public comment.
You got the Zoom link.
I think the first thing Jody said when we like went into the pandemic was what? No more pizza. So it's something.
Oh, we
and
never got it.
I swear every third Tuesday I was going to send a pizza to your house, and it's ended up too many other things. And I think the second also, I just wanted, I mentioned earlier, Robert is leaving us.
Yeah.
We hired Robert 3 years ago, and it was, he had to fill the shoes of Tim Turn, if you all remember, who was an extraordinary young man. It was like, oh my God, where are we going to find somebody that can, and Robert, I remember when we were interviewing him, I made a comment about him, something about bright young man he seemed, and I, after that, got excoriated because I wasn't allowed to. You're not allowed to say young man. It's like he's 24. What? But I will say that Robert, what's very impressed me is the manner in which he held himself, and he during that interview, the feed went out a couple times, and it took a few minutes to get back on, and he went and the man said, "You had just asked me this," and it was like, I went, okay. When I was 24, 25, I would have just been panicking, and so it was the little things, and it's why I'm always, I know Robert always, yeah, I know you coach the kids, but what I look for in a player is, someone who fits in, someone who, what are their strengths and what do they bring to the table, and Robert brings so much to this job. I don't have to give him a lot of instruction. I don't have to, I say, here's what we need to get done, and he's working on it. He does more than anybody in this city realizes. I don't know how I'm gonna refill those shoes. As I said to you last week, I'll think about it tomorrow, me and Scarlett. But just some of the things that Robert's been involved in, and when we hired him, I handed him the 10th and Page survey, and I said, I need you to take this and run with it, and he did, and the largest survey we've ever done in the city. When we, working on the mall, he has handled that thing with working with Department of Historic Resources and that research and thing, and he's done a lot of heavy lifting for the BAR, just behind the scenes, and for the Historic Resources Committee. So Robert, I call you a young man. I hope that's not to take as a compliment. Your future's very bright, and I've known for some time that it wasn't here. I just hope wherever you end up, maybe you lean on us, because we're going to need. Maybe we'll want a job at working for you someday. So I just wish you luck. I know you're not leaving town. He's here for 2 semesters, but you have been extraordinary to work with, and I'm kind of tomorrow. I think I'm going to freak out a little bit. But thank you for everything.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jeff, and I'll save the tears and the sobby goodbyes for when we're not on television. And I also have 3.5 more weeks. So, but for all of you on the BAR, this has been, this is my 32nd BAR meeting. Wow. And I look forward to it every month. It's work. I have to sit here for like 6 hours and change slides, but it's so cool. I get to learn so much about design review and just learn all of your different perspectives and the things you pick up on reviewing projects. And it's just been such a wonderful pleasure to work with all of you. So thank you for having me and for being great to work with, and Jeff is just an incredible person to work for as well, but I will talk to you later, so.
Well, I just have to tell a story of going to Charlotte Courthouse to to attend a marker dedication, a highway marker dedication, and then this fellow comes up behind me and taps me on the shoulder, and it's Robert, and he's there with his dad, and his roots in historic preservation go deep. Their family is old Charlotte County, and they're telling me all kinds of stuff. And I was down there working on another project. They're telling me all kinds of things about the project I was working on that I didn't know. So it was extraordinary and really great to see that you have that kind of depth and that interest and that love of historic preservation.
Yeah, thank you. We'll come back to Charlotte County anytime. We have lots of good old buildings there for you to look at, so it has been a lifelong love, and I'm excited
How do
to-
we have meetings without Robert? I don't understand.
It'll happen.
I will think about it.
No, it won't.
I can
I'm very worried.
It'll happen. Jeff is fully capable.
I'm leaving at the
Fully
right time.
capable.
Right before things fall apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeff is, we have a fully capable staff, and I know anybody would be lucky to have this job, and I think that there will be some
Well, then
good
why
candidates.
are you quitting?
Yeah.
You know, my mother is asking me the same question. She
So-
really
I
is. She's
agree.
very angry at me.
So remind us, you're going on to graduate school
So
in
I've been
Chicago?
enrolled in the Architectural History Masters at UVA, and I've been doing it part-time, but I'm tired of doing school and work at the same time, and I just want to finish the degree.
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna do one more semester, full-time, and then graduate in December.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
then-
maybe come crawling back.
And then,
You know.
okay.
Yeah,
So you're still gonna be around?
Yeah.
James will be seeing you around the university.
There's always public comment, Robert.
You don't think this third Tuesday of each month, I mean, what am I gonna be doing?
Right, it's totally
I'll
free.
be here.
At
so.
home,
And
adult
actually,
beverages.
facilities
You'd probably be
management-
with Jody.
Yeah, actually, it will be,
Well,
Facilities management has a history of hiring historic
Well,
preservation graduates.
Stop trying
Listen,
to hire him
listen,
away from the city.
Yeah.
I
Oh my
like
gosh.
Charlottesville a lot. I mean, there are other places I wanna live, but I won't jump at the chance to leave either, so.
Well, we will miss you.
we will miss you for sure. Robert, all of your efforts they've been they've been visible to us, and it really shows. And gosh, we couldn't do our work that we do without the incredible number of hours and dedication that you put into it. And it's really fun to see when you just light up on some of the projects that you were working on, and where the passion for what you were doing really came through. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.